Chair, I can confirm that we are now live on YouTube.
Thank you very much. So good evening and welcome everyone to this virtual response and recovery committee. Apologies for starting a few minutes late. We had a few IT difficulties. Welcome to those members of the public who are watching on the Council's YouTube channel. My name is Councillor Caroline Kerr and I'm chairing this meeting this evening. I'm just going to ask everybody to make sure that they haven't got mobile phones switched on for the duration of the meeting, and also to mute yourselves when you're not speaking. The meeting's being broadcast live on our YouTube channel, as I've already said. A copy of the recording will be available on the channel shortly after the meeting. Members and officers are reminded to keep their microphones on mute unless they're called to speak. Members can indicate that they wish to speak by typing their name in the chat function. Please don't use the chat function to ask questions because they won't be answered, as the chat stream cannot be seen on the public broadcast. So before we get started, I just want to go through who's who. The councillors who are present remotely this evening are the members of this committee. We also have a number of officers present whose cameras are switched off unless they're invited to advise the committee on issues. I'd now like to introduce the councillors and the officers. If you could please indicate your presence. So first of all, Councillor Anita Shaper.
Here, good evening. Thank you.
Good evening. Councillor Rowena Bass.
Yep, here, thank you.
Hello. Councillor Emily Davey.
Good evening.
Good evening. Councillor Kevin Davis. I can see that Councillor Kevin Davis is present, but I'm not sure that he's listening to us. Councillor Kevin Davis, are you hearing this meeting? Councillor Davis, are you hearing us? Should we go on? Councillor Hilary Gander.
Yes, present.
Councillor Alison Holt.
I'm here, thank you.
Councillor Rebecca Mole.
Good evening.
Councillor Malcolm South, who's my vice chair.
Good evening, everybody.
And Councillor Diane White.
Good evening.
And councillors who are not members of the committee but are in attendance this evening, there's only one, it's Councillor Falchikoff-Sumner.
Good evening, Chair.
Good evening. I'm not sure if Councillor Davis is hearing us or not, but we'll go on. We have a number of...
I am now.
Oh, very good.
Good Chair, and Councillor Cobbett is also in attendance.
Oh, and he's not on the list. That's terrible. Councillor Cobbett.
Thanks. Yes, I'm here.
Apologies. We have a number of officers in attendance this evening who are present to give an overview of reports and advice during the meeting. Their cameras and microphones will be turned off unless they're called upon to speak on matters other than procedural advice. And I would ask that if you are called upon to speak, perhaps you could introduce yourself as officers. There is a provision under Procedure 27 within the Council's Constitution to permit councillors who do not sit on a committee to address the meeting if permission is granted by this committee. We have received a request from Councillor Falchikoff-Sumner to do that this evening in relation to 4 items on the agenda. Item 4, budget monitoring. Item 5, the financial implications of COVID. Item 8, the Kingston Economic Recovery Task Force. And Item 10, the street lighting project. Are members happy to permit this, or do we need to go to a vote? Unless I hear otherwise through the chat, I'm assuming that everyone is happy with that. Fiona, are you happy to confirm that nobody wants to vote on this?
I am, Chair.
Thank you very much. First item on the agenda is apologies for absence and the attendance of substitute members. Fiona, are there any apologies or substitutions?
Yes, Chair, I have apologies for absence from Councillor Bailey and Councillor Sharper is her substitute.
Thank you very much. The second item is declarations of interest. Members are asked to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests and any other non-pecuniary interests, i.e. personal interests, relevant to items on this agenda. Do members have any declarations of interest? Please indicate using the chat function and I will call you to speak. Councillor Diane White.
Thank you. In the late material that came out today in Appendix C, there is passing reference to my place of work. I don't believe that this is a conflict of interest, but if the conversation, the discussion veers in the wrong direction, then I may remove myself from the meeting.
Thank you very much. Thanks for informing us. Should we move now to item 3, the minutes? The minutes of the committee's meeting on the 28th of May have been circulated. Are there any objections to approving those minutes as correct? If not, then thank you, and I'll sign those at a convenient moment. There's a note here that non-members of the committee cannot move a motion on accuracy. However, if a motion is moved by a committee member, it doesn't require a seconder. So let us move on now to item 4, which is budget monitoring, the year-end outturn report, which Councillor Holt is going to introduce. Councillor Holt.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, I'd like to present the report, which is in the papers under Appendix A, and I'd like to move the as what's set out in Appendix A1, which is yes, it's on 8.1. Just looking at my other screen, sorry, to see what it was. So yes, it was just to say that I'm not going to read them all out, but that's what I'd like to recommend to this committee. It has been, it is the outturn for the year, which has at times throughout the year been a challenging time. And at one point in month 6, we were looking at having an overspend of 1.9 million. And at that point, we implemented some expenditure restraint. And I'm very pleased to see that that brought us back within budget. And actually, at the end of the year, because of the business rates pulling that we got in at the end of the year of 2.5 million, we actually had an underspend of 1.8 million. And given the current circumstances that we're in with the pandemic, it was decided that and hopefully ratified that we would put the 1.8 million into a COVID provision, and that's what's reflected in the papers. As I'd like to say that it has been a lot of hard work by the officers over the year to bring this budget in on target. And I'd say it was a lot at the end of the day. It was because we did do the expenditure restraint partway through the year, and also the business rate pulling. For me, that's a concern going forward, because we're unlikely to, because of the changes in the business rate pooling system, and also with the current pandemic, it's unlikely that we will have that happening again. So it makes the situation, so that's not a sort of windfall situation, is unlikely to happen at the end of next year. In terms of the outturn, is obviously looking at areas that are of concern, continue to have a lot of demand in our adults and children's, and I think that's likely to happen going forward as well. So that's obviously a concern. And the high needs block, having the position of having a cumulative deficit of 19 million and an in-year overspend of 5 million at the end of this year is obviously a significant concern for the council as well, and we've mentioned that in previous reports. Say that over the last few years, we have been putting money into our reserves, or what we can call the rainy day fund, and that has we've been putting in money, sort of 3.5 million is what we've put in over the last few years, and this probably quite good that we have done that. We did that because of the position with the high needs block, but actually it probably then means that our reserves are in a better position for us tackling, and look at that in the next paper, tackling the financial impact of the pandemic. So that's my introduction. I don't know if Sarah Ireland, the 151 officer, would like to add anything else, and then just open up for questions.
So Sarah, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Hort. I'm Sarah Ireland. I'm the Executive Director of Corporate and Communities. I am the Section 151 Officer for Kingston. I have nothing to add. Councillor Hort has covered the main points. I just wanted to thank officers and members for the support in delivering the budget, because actually setting the budget seems hard, but delivery is a real hard bit, so thank you. With me tonight, I have Rachel Howard, who's my deputy, and Lucy Copas, who supports the Dedicated Schools grant budget from AFC, to help ask any technical questions. And I also have colleagues from the strategic leadership team to support on service questions. So happy to take questions, Chair.
Sorry, I think I was mute for that. I hope that I'm doing this procedurally correctly. I think that at this point I move the recommendations at the front of the report on page A1 before we go to the debate. Is that correct, Fiona?
Yes, Chair.
Yes, okay. Councillor Self, would you second them?
Thank you, Chair. I second that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have Councillor Falchkov-Sumner, who wishes to speak under Procedural Rule 27 tonight. Councillor Falchkov-Sumner, can you please now address the committee with your comments?
Thank you, Chair. I also had some questions. I have, along with doing the work that we've all been doing during the lockdown COVID crisis, working with charities, I've also spent the time examining all of the council's invoices over the last year and over the last 4 years. Every single invoice over £500, as many of you will know, has to be published on the council's website. So I've spent a considerable amount of time going through all of that information. And I've actually been incredibly shocked by what I've seen. And I see some councillors grinning, but I think you'll find if you were actually to go through them yourself, you would see that there's actually quite some serious points in here. So I'll start with questions, if I may, because my personal belief is that we've actually got a very serious problem with spending in the council, and a very serious problem with purchasing, procurement, and contracts within the council. So if I could just perhaps ask a question and give some greater explanation on as to why I'm asking these questions. For example, how many, I've noticed from the reports given that we're using, at peak COVID, we're using 10,000 at the most plastic bibs a month. If you look in reports, that's what it says, 10,000, well, it's 19,500 over 2 months. So how many plastic bibs were delivered to Guildhall on Monday? I met with several council officers on Monday, and they showed me the room where these bibs were being stored. Now, and bear in mind, this is just the bibs, because it's not the first time they're being delivered. This was just one of many dispatches. So, for example, based on the figures that they gave me, we had £140,000 worth of plastic bibs, which cost, if you look on the internet, anything between 2 and 8 pence per bib. So we had in the region of 1,750,000 bibs delivered just on Monday. Now, if you calculate that on monthly usage, that equates to something in the region of 16 years worth of bibs. That's on peak usage. Now, we're also hearing that the problem... Yeah?
I'm sorry. I don't mean to be discourteous at all, but you are not actually a member of this committee and you are invited to speak, but I would ask you to be brief. If you have a very long question, we can give you a written reply. And I'd also like you to please, if you can, try to make your questions relevant to the report that we're examining at the moment, because I'm not quite sure whether these questions actually relate to the financial outturn.
Well, they do, bearing in mind that if you go through the amount of money that's been spent on various different items, not only are we underfunded by the government, but we're also overspending. Our spending is completely out of control. And if you go and have a look at the invoices and what we're spending money on, completely out of control. There's millions of pounds of money that has been wasted.
Okay, thank you. I will pass your question on to to officers if they would like to deal with it. But I would just, since you have brought up the question of PPE, I'm very happy to take that myself. I think that we know what happened at the beginning of this pandemic, when as a country we didn't have enough PPE. We saw our hospitals struggling without it, and we certainly saw our care homes struggling without it. I, for one, do not have a problem if the Royal Borough of Kingston buys PPE in advance in order to prepare for the potential second wave, which we all fear. Now, you may have a different view, but I think it would be better to err on the side of caution on this subject than to be cavalier with the safety of the people who work for us and who work with us. And during the pandemic, as I'm sure you will have read, we did a good job in trying to supply the care homes and the hospital, in fact, when it was short of PPE. We did a good job in being a kind of safety net for those other organisations. I don't really think there's anything to apologise about in that. But I'm very happy to pass this on to any officer who'd like to pick it up. I don't know whether, Sarah, you feel this is one for you.
Excuse me, 16 years worth of PPE is not a reasonable response. It's a panic response.
Councillor Sumner, I do have to ask you to respect the position of the chair. Please don't interrupt. If you want to speak again, please put your name in the chat. But I think that Iona Liddington would like to respond to this.
Good evening, I'm Iona Liddington, I'm Director of Public Health and I chair the PPE working group. Just to correct figures, I'm not quite sure where Councillor Sumner's got her data from. At the moment we have about a year's supply of aprons on the peak COVID use, but we obviously have staff returning to frontline duties, so we will actually have greater utilisation of that, so that will drop. So we have adequate supplies, but I wouldn't say we had excess supplies, and I'm not at all sure where you could have got your 16 years worth of figures from. So I'm happy to provide more detailed information if that's helpful. But yes, I do find the figures that you're quoting don't tally with the stock and utilisation rates that I'm aware of as the lead officer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iona. Fiona, can you please announce who has indicated that they would like to speak next, and I will make a note of it and try and get people in the right order.
Yes, Chair. I have Councillor Davis followed by Councillor Bass.
Thank you. Councillor Davis, please go ahead.
Thank you. I suppose on PPE, we'll know next year whether we over purchased PPE, won't we? So when we can count again and see what we've got left. I just wanted to turn to a sort of slightly strategic issue around the budget outturn, because obviously it's good news that it's come in effectively on budget, even though you have got some extra good news from the pooling of the business rates. I suppose my comment is that this is, whilst it's good to actually officers are doing it and members are working hard to bring it in on budget, it seems to me that we've been in this situation every year for the last 20 years where we set a budget, 6 months through, we realise that we're overspending, so we slam the anchors on, haul in everything, and then slowly crawl back to where we should have been at the first place by the year end. And there's clearly something not right after this length of time with the way we budget that worries me slightly. I mean, it's been worrying me for a few years, to be honest. It's not a new thing, and I'm not suggesting that this is the fault of the administration. But it's clearly the case that the council is going to have to look really hard at the way it goes about setting a budget, because it does seem irrational that we go through this every single year. I didn't have time this afternoon to go back and check that's the case, but I'm pretty certain that the majority of years we've certainly been in this position. So if there is ever anything good to come out of this pandemic, it's a plea from me that actually we use this as an opportunity to really examine how and why we budget, because it clearly isn't working the way that we're currently doing it. And I think it would be helpful if we were to look at that as a sort of matter of priority. And the reason for that is because, of course, once the year 6, 7 monitoring comes and we slam the anchors on, the reality is it's almost impossible to, I mean, I know there's a balancing act that goes through and they make sure that we're not spending things that we don't need to spend, but we are on things that we should be spending on. But I think it'd be really good to not have to even begin to do that if we can avoid it anyway. The other issue on that, and this is another plea of a similar sort, is on our capital budget, because we seem to have a systemic problem with our capital budget, which is that we set a budget and then we never spend it. And again, this is not just the first year. This goes back probably, in my thinking, probably at least 5 years that we've significantly not delivered the capital spend that we're supposed to. And I just wonder whether I accept that there's a review going to take place. I accept that SLT have undertaken to have a look at this, but I don't think that's quite enough. I do think that needs to come back to us as members so that we can be absolutely confident that when we do set capital budgets, the resources are in place for officers to deliver it. And if there isn't delivery, there are some very, very good reasons why it's not being done. Because at the minute, I'm not sure what we've seen in the outturn actually delivers very good reasons why some of the spending hasn't taken place. A couple of clarifications would be helpful. One is around the Brexit contingency, which we've not used, which is hardly surprising. It seems to indicate in the papers it's being held over into this year, but I wasn't quite sure how that was happening, and maybe I've misunderstood that and it's not being held over, but it'd be good to get some clarity around that. And it would also, in this similar vein, be good to have some clarity around how the additional business rates pooling is being treated for this current year. So it's come out extremely positive for us last year and helped with sort of 2.8 million extra. But are we accounting for any of that, or are we thinking that's just another rainy day issue we're just keeping our back pocket until next close of next financial year? So it'd be good to understand how we're treating both those things.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davis. I don't know whether Councillor Holt would like to pick any of those points up, but I have a few things to say. First of all, I accept that it's difficult to come in exactly on budget, and I congratulate the officers and the members involved for their efforts. I would say that when you say it's been the same for 20 years, I don't think it's been quite the same over 20 years. 10 years ago, we had £66 million coming in from central government, and I think that made quite a substantial difference and made budgeting a lot less difficult than it has subsequently become. On the capital underspend, I think that's always something that's seen over a period of time. It's not unusual to have slippage, but this is something I agree that we need to look at. On the Brexit contingency, I'm afraid I have to ask the officers to come in on any detail, and similarly on the business rates pooling. Councillor Holt, do you have anything you would like to add?
I probably would just echo what you have said. A budget is set at a time, and what we do is look at that over the period. So we've had the savings over the time. We've allocated it, RAG rated it into red, amber, and green. And as you know, when we came into administration, there was a 22 million of savings, of which 7 million have ended up in red. So each year there's going to be things that happen that mean that you can't achieve a budget, because once you set a budget, something happens and that means that you can't do it. And that's why it has to be a combination of things. It has to be setting the budget of what you would expect to do. If we can't do that, then we have to revisit it again, and the officers have to come forward with something else to infill, which is what they have done in this case. But it is a challenging situation, and part of it is through the expenditure restraint, but obviously the other part of that is looking to see what we need to do. It's not going to be stopping doing things that we need to do. It's looking at things that can perhaps be delayed or done in a different way. So that's probably what I would say about the budget process. Capital budgeting has been, as Councillor Davis knows, is something that I have been aware of, and have actually asked the officers as well, because whilst you would expect there to be some slippage, and in certain areas I think it's quite clear why that slippage has happened, I don't think the level of it is right. I think you're absolutely correct. You should be, if we're setting a capital budget, we should be following it through. There are within the capital budget, you'll see there are some things that we've decided to do and decided during the year to stop. So there's a lot of reasons as to why the capital budget has got the amount of slippage at the end of the year. and I think that is there. Could maybe look at the specific ones if you wanted to look at any particular ones, but it is certainly something that was on my radar and had spoken to the officers about. So I don't know whether Sarah would like to come back and add anything there.
I'm very happy to invite Sarah Ireland to speak, but I think Ian Thomas also wants to speak.
Thanks, Chair. Ian Thomas, Chief Executive. So the Council's business is a complex one. The budget is a representation of the Council's plan, but in financial terms. This variance represents around a 1% variance. Last year, it was a 0.5% variance. This is good performance, colleagues. You will never achieve zero variance. You set out on a plan that things change. You have unforeseeable circumstances that you have to respond to. We are a complex business that responds to demand. So, it's a credit to officers and members that we're sat here talking about an underspend with such a very small variance. And I don't want to give you the impression that we'll improve on that, because it's the nature of our business. That's my professional opinion. In terms of the capital programme, I absolutely accept what Councillor Davis has said and support what Councillor Holt has said. We need to take a fresh look at that, and as officers we are doing so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yes, just one thing. I haven't been here as long as Councillor Davis to remember that, but unfortunately I've been many places that suffer with the same issues around budget. I think the Chief Exec is right, but also I think we must remember that we've had 10 years of austerity in local government funding, which means that budgets are very, very challenging to deliver, and probably adds to that. And as you know, myself and Naz, the Exec Director of Place, have committed to look at the capital programme and to bring back and make sure its performance and delivery is improved. On the Brexit contingency, for the question that Councillor Davis asked, this is in the base budget. It remained in the base budget going into 2021 because we were in transition and we haven't fully exited it yet, and it's for any contingencies from that. On the business rate pool, Kingston, as did a number of authorities, never put that in this base budget because it was the uncertainty of it. And I have to say I'm really pleased that we didn't, because unfortunately the pool did not continue for London with the ability to keep any business rate growth. So unfortunately there will not be that type of growth or type of free money at the end of next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Councillor Bass, I think you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. I had some comments and some questions, if I may. I just wanted to, first of all, thank the Section 151 officer for her time yesterday. We spent quite a lot of time going through and she answered a lot of my questions. And also thanks for coming back with some of the answers on those today. And I know some of the other answers are coming next week. However, to the administration, I think it's rather disappointing now that we have shops, cafes, golf, pubs, all of those coming back, but we're still not going to have, proper council meetings. I mean, this agenda is absolutely packed. So we can't really give the full scrutiny that we should be to each individual item. So I would ask the administration to at least consider at the next council, at least review or discuss when we're going to have what stage we are at now that we're coming out of lockdown, about reinstating proper council meetings, in particular a full meeting, finance meeting, to give that the proper scrutiny, and also health scrutiny. Also, some of the questions that I've asked the Section 151 officer to come back are ones that we'd probably ordinarily have covered at Audit Committee, but of course that's on hold now as well. So we don't really have any opportunity to review in detail the council's risk and governance. Anyway, so coming more particularly to this paper, obviously it's always better to have an underspend rather than an overspend. So I suppose well done to all the officers for achieving that. But it is interesting to note that out of the general fund, i.e. what's funded by the council tax this year, 3.5 million of that has gone into reserves. That was agreed in the budget. And then on top of that is the 1.8 million underspend. So that's a total of over £5 million, which, presumably equates to pretty much most of a 5% council tax increase. So for all that talk about the your administration talking about the state of the council was in, you know, verging on bankruptcy. That doesn't really seem to be the case. The other point to note, it's obviously very disappointing looking at the schools budget, schools outturn. I see that there's an extra 5 million in-year deficit on the schools budget, i.e. on the direct schools grant, SEND, bringing the deficit to nearly 20 million. And I guess my question is, when is that going to start being put under control? And then my other question was about capital, but I think you've talked about that enough. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bass. I'm sure that my colleagues would like to take some of your questions, some parts of your questions. On the question of returning to the usual committee structure, it is true that lockdown is being eased, but we are not yet allowed to have meetings in person. And when that happens, we will obviously revisit the whole question. Nobody wants to do meetings in this virtual setting. It's just a case of needs must.
Sorry, can I just clarify? The point wasn't about having them in person. It was the points that we made in our amendment to council, in that we cover the range of meetings, not the setting.
I understand that, but Councillor Bass, as I explained at full council, and I think at last month's R&R committee, it takes 3 times as many Democratic Services officers, and it takes a number of IT officers to do a virtual meeting. So it's very heavy in terms of staff deployment. However, I thought you would be pleased to know that the Audit Committee will be meeting on the 29th of July and will be meeting again in September. We are reviewing these arrangements. I always said they were not set in concrete. We're in very strange times and we're having to do things in a way that we wouldn't usually, but we're flexible and we're open to revisiting decisions. And on the Audit Committee, I'm very pleased that we're going to be able to go ahead with that at the end of July. And as you probably know, the Health and Wellbeing Board will be meeting informally next month as well. I think that the other questions I would hand over to my colleagues if they wish to take them. I don't know whether Councillor Holt or Councillor White would like to pick up on any of the points that were raised.
Shall I go first, Alison?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your question, Rowena. I agree with you. It is extremely disappointing that the funding, that there's still the overspend. I think it's extremely hard to make even more headway into this. There is absolutely not enough money in the system, and that's just a fact. And what we can do is lobby the government as we do and try and do everything we possibly can, but there isn't enough money in the system. I think our children's services have done an incredible job this year. They're working hard, so hard. Lucy, Ian and the whole team are working so hard to try and bring more savings. The SEND transformation plan, which is the vehicle for both improving service but also bringing down costs, is being revised at the moment as well. They did actually make £2.5 million of savings this year, so they are doing a really good job. The costs of education, health and care plans are coming down individually, and unfortunately the numbers of the plans are not coming down, but we're not an outlier in that. It's not that we're doing something wrong. I think everything is being looked at. We're doing everything we possibly can, working extremely hard, and there just isn't enough money in the system. Over to you, Alison.
Okay, so I probably would start with, as this paper would normally come to finance and partnerships, and that is not happening at the moment, but it would have happened this evening, and then the one after that would have been in the beginning of October. So actually what you're getting is more by having these meetings in this format. So that would be, I can't speak for the other committees, but that's certainly the position with finance and partnerships. As far as the comments with follow on from Diane, who's obviously closer to the children's area than myself, but in terms of the budget, the transfer, which I think also we did under the previous administration, 3 million to the reserve, so reserves for this, they're related. So the school's budget overspending by 5 million, and when we came in it was at 8 million. So inroads have been made over the period, but it's just, again, it's about about, it's a demand-led thing. So we've got to look at it and look at ways to try and mitigate it. But every year there's an increase in demand. So it's about bringing it down. But I do agree it is very troubling, and I agree with Diane that it's something that we have had a lot of long look at, and it is something that I do think we've done a lot of work on it. We've had people in looking at it and been up to the DFE to speak to them about it. I don't think we're alone in this problem, so I can't say it's just a Kingston thing, but it is very troubling for us, and that was the reason for the transfer to the reserves, was to that we knew that there was likely to still be an overspend, and unlikely to be going forward until the government recognise that they need to fund this in a different way.
Thank you very much. I think one of the officers wants to speak. Ian?
Thanks, Chair. I just want to echo what members have said about the work of AFC and our teachers, supported by the portfolio holder, working incredibly hard to reduce cost. The fact of the matter is that demand for children who need education, health and care plans has risen exponentially since the introduction of the Children and Families Act 2014, and the Local Government Association predict that the gap will reach 1.6 billion by 21-22. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other people wishing to speak, and if that's the case, I think we'll now take the vote by roll call. I will take the recommendations en bloc unless a colleague indicates to the contrary in the chat function. So please indicate if you would prefer not to see these recommendations voted on en bloc. And I'm not seeing that. So I think Fiona is now going to ask members how they wish to vote.
Thank you, Chair. I will now call upon each councillor in turn. Please indicate how you wish to vote by saying for, against or abstain. Thank you. Councillor Cobbett.
For.
Councillor Davey.
For.
Councillor Davis.
Abstain.
Councillor Gander.
For.
Councillor Holt.
For.
Councillor Kerr.
For.
Councillor Moll.
For.
Councillor Self.
For.
Councillor Self.
For. Am I not?
Councillor White.
For.
And Councillor Shaper.
For.
Councillor Bailey.
For.
Thank you.
It's Councillor Bass here. You left me out and I'm abstaining.
I do apologise, Councillor Bass.
That's all right.
Councillor Bass.
Sorry, do you want me to say it again?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay. Okay, no problem. I'm abstaining.
Thank you. So so the vote is 9 in favour and 2 abstentions. So the motion is carried.
Thank you very much. So that recommendation is agreed. Let's move on now to item 5 on the agenda, which is COVID-19 financial implications. And once again, I'd like to ask Councillor Holt to introduce the item.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so it's in Appendix B. I just want to bring forward the recommendations that we note the financial impact of the pandemic. We implement financial constraints and a freeze on non-essential recruitment, and bring forward a package of in-year financial savings and options to mitigate the impacts that are reflected in the paper. So again, I would like to first of all thank all the officers who have stepped up to this challenge, mobilising staff and services in a short time scale to new ways of working and setting up the hub with a whole range of services to meet the needs of our residents. So it really has been a tremendous effort, and particularly just mobilising the staff and all of us to be able to do this kind of thing and to work from home. At the beginning of the pandemic, we were told by the housing minister, housing MHCLG minister, that the local government had to step up and not to let financial considerations get in the way of making sure that we cope with what is coming at us. So councils up and down the country took that on to come at his word and did what they needed to support our residents. The report indicates the scale of the financial impact on Kingston and puts significant strain on our council finances, which were already under pressure after a decade of cuts to our budgets. And again, I don't think we're any different from any other council. In this report, it's showing that there's a 20 million impact, partly on this year and partly on next year. The most concerning bit is the part this year, and after taking into account the provision that we've set aside in the previous report of 1.8 million, it's at 10 million, which is a significant amount of difference, especially when the times are challenging, and it is a point in time. So we'll have to see what else is still to flow out of this and what further measures have to be put in place as we continue with this, because it doesn't feel, although we're exiting a bit, it doesn't feel like this is the end of it. So we have received some funding, and we're very grateful to the government for having brought in a whole load of different things that have been very helpful to different sectors, to our businesses locally and through business grants, and also having this unallocated fund of 8.5 million that we've got, which is definitely needed, and I'm very grateful for that. But then when we looked at what we have been spending, but added to which what we've lost out in, particularly the savings that we're not able to get on and do, and we haven't reflected all of the savings. We've looked at it, and the officer will continue to review what the savings are likely to be, and what our savings were in the year, and what's likely to not be achieved. We've got lost income from various sources. As we know, we're a council that is reliant on our council tax, and that is also under pressure from a council tax reduction scheme, which is actually a very, very good scheme and helps the most needy in our borough, but that is under pressure, as is our collection fund. We had a very good rate of collection in the borough, and that is under pressure. Business rates is obviously another factor. We've already mentioned that already, where the outturn report, we did actually get the windfall of getting that money from the business rate pooling is unlikely to be that again, and it's very likely to be negative. That's what we think. We're still continuing with the high needs block, and the returns to in our returns to MHCLG, we've made mention of that because that's what our reserves were being built up for, and it is, again, I would say that thankfully that we do have those reserves there, because when we're looking at this scale of differential on our budget, I think whilst we're bringing in financial restraint, it is a very big difference. It's a very big figure than what we were looking at last year. So I probably would be asking the opposition here, and also my fellow councillors, is that we need to be bringing this forward and continuing to lobby government to acknowledge the role that the local government are playing in this pandemic, and that we need more funding to continue to do the work that we're doing. And we don't know what the economic outturn will be for us in Kingston, and certainly for the rest of the country, but it's not looking great. So I would just I'd like to bring this forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Holt. And I think we would all agree with your call for government to step in and assist local government in general across the country. I don't know whether Sarah Ireland would like to add anything at this point.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say, and just to be mindful to members who would be, particularly those who are on finance and partnerships, this isn't a monitoring report. This is a snapshot looking at the COVID impact. The Council's quarterly monitoring report will pick up any wider issues, including this impact, and will be brought to this committee in August. Much as this information is what's requested from the MHCLG, which is the Ministry of Housing and Communities and Local Government, across local governments, so that they can continue to assess that impact. And that's what we are presenting here today to you.
Thank you very much. Fiona, I just want to check that I have everybody in the right order. I have Councillor Sumner, Councillor Davis, Councillor Bass and Councillor Cobbett. Is that correct?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. In that case, Councillor Sumner, and may I please press on you to be brief if you can and to the point of this report.
Thank you, Chair. Would you like questions first, or do you want comments and questions together?
Both together, please.
So questions refer to, so in recommendations, first of all, I would also like to say that yes, we need more government funding, very clearly. There's no question of that, and I will back any claims to request more government funding. But that has to be hand in hand with making sure that we are spending prudently and that we're actually being good, applying good governance to the money that we have been given. And I think those two things have to go hand in hand. So if we look at the resolve, so item 2 of resolve and about a freeze on non-essential recruitment. As hopefully you all know, we spent £250,000 last year on recruitment consultants. So does that mean we won't have that cost this year? Secondly, we are currently paying £41,000 per month for a head of housing. Can we have an idea of how long that is going to be in situ? Because obviously that is enormous spend. In relation to table B6 about grants, can I ask what methods of governance have been put in place about awarding COVID grants? For example, we have so far as an authority given £450,000 to care homes that, according to our own website and according to our own published list of invoices and spend, we don't have any previous relationship with. We also, and part of that, and I hope you'll all share my concern about this, and the huge amount, and part of that includes care homes which are rated inadequate, and also some homes that aren't rated, are not even listed with the CQC. And in the case of 2 of those grants, totaling £17,000, they're actually being struck off by Companies House. So is there any guarantee that the money we have given away is actually going to be used in order to help people that actually need the help? So I would really like some kind of report into what governance has gone into distributing these grants to make sure that those people that needed the money most were actually given it. I really think it's quite serious, and I think we do have a duty to do that. In terms of comments, I think that we should have a return of the Finance and Contract Committee so that these things can be actually examined properly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know whether any officers would like to pick up any of the specific figures that Councillor Sumner has quoted, because I don't recognise them. But we're very happy to give you a written reply unless any officer is ready now to speak about it.
Chair, if I could come in, I support that. I think if Councillor Sumner, because obviously we haven't got the detail of what she says, I'm happy if she provides that to me. We will provide an answer to the whole committee. Yep.
Thank you very much. The next person I have on my list is Councillor Davis, please.
Thank you very much. On the issue of government funding, my only view on that, which is partly a reflection of this report, is that obviously no government's going to write an open-ended cheque. They are going to want to make sure that what they're writing cheques for, if they write them, is money, as Councillor Sumner-Falchkoff has just said, is well spent. So I suppose one of my concerns about this report is that it's good in identifying where the issues are as far as they are, but it's not very heavy on detail, and that in a way is not a criticism. I think that's probably just because we don't have certainty about some of these figures anyway, if I'm honest. I don't think that's anybody trying to hide anything. I think it's just the fact that given where we are, we need a bit more firming up of this. And it may be that this report has to come back to us more than once as it starts to be clearer exactly what the costs of it were. So I'd certainly ask that as time goes on, maybe not July, but certainly August, we ought to have this report back again once there's some more figures added to it as an actual action part of it. There's a few questions I've got over it. One is, and this is again, it's lack of detail. It talks about loss of income from the council tax reduction scheme, and it also includes figures I think I've seen somewhere of £3 million, £3.5 million on paragraph 20. It would be really helpful to understand a bit more about how much more and how many more people are claiming council tax reduction, because it doesn't seem to give that detail. It just says it's happened and that's the end of it. So I think that for me would be one area that I'd want to have a more examination of. There's also the issue of the DSG, and I'd like to understand, and maybe somebody from AFC can help me, I'd like to understand what work is going on with the schools, because of course by September schools will have either been in shutdown or only just opening mode, and one would presume there's some significant savings that will have been made in schools during that period. And obviously they've got to pay staff, and that's the biggest element of it, and I get that, but not having a building open, not having, you know, some of the stuff that they have been spending on it, there must have been some savings. So it would be helpful. Maybe it's something the schools forum themselves need to think about and have a look at as well, on that particular aspect. On others that I've got questions over, and I'm not a process nerd, but at paragraph 5, it talks about exceptional costs, and I promise you I'm not going to get too dragged down into PPE because I don't look good in PPE, but my recollection is that we have agreed a standing order 40 emergency provision for £200,000 worth of PPE. As it happens, I didn't ever get asked about it. It just appeared on our website, so I don't know how that happened. But we seem to have spent 4 times that amount. And I'm just a bit curious as to how we went from a standing order that said we're going to spend £200,000 to £800,000, and nobody seems to pick this up or requested further authority to do it. So that's the sort of process point. I think we're probably going to come on to some of the adult social care stuff later when we talk about care homes, so I won't worry about that just now. I just would like it confirmed though, also on paragraph 9, that the on and off street parking income is being put down as a loss of income, which it clearly is, but obviously that doesn't directly affect our general account, because obviously we have to switch money in and out of that because it goes into our parking account, which is somewhat more ring fenced than others. We've done the council tax. Yeah, I think that's about it. As I said, what I would like to see happen is that as this paper develops and actually gets some more flesh on it, so we start to understand a bit more about what we have spent, that it comes back, possibly not for the next meeting, but certainly the one after that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davis. I would just like to pick up your first point about your desire for us to revisit this. I think that's very reasonable, and I have no problem about coming back to it, perhaps in a couple of months when we might, as you say, have more detail. You mentioned a number of different things. I'm not sure which of my colleagues would like to pick up. Perhaps Councillor Holt or perhaps Councillor White, or would you prefer that I went to an officer?
Well, I'm not sure, because I have been looking at the council tax reduction scheme and also the council tax, but I wouldn't like to give the figures. They have been giving them to me, but I don't want. I think it'd probably be better if an officer answers that question. What I do know is it has gone up, but it's obviously for the most in need in our borough, and that has increased. And also we have been giving some leeway with regard to payment plans as well. So there has been an impact on our council tax overall. I don't know if I get. I mean, there's likely. I think, as Sarah mentioned in her information as well, she said that, you know, at the end of the day, this is the figures that we're putting forward to the MHCLG as the figures that we think that are having the impact. The month 3 results, if that's what we're bringing back to committee the next time, will actually probably give a better indication of how we're doing as a council, and that could probably be sort of teased out in the outturn report at that time. So that's probably, and I think that also includes, Sarah, you might want to take on the parking account too as well, because I do think there are some pressures there, and there will be pressures that will come through this year and next year on our parking. We've not got the income, and you are right, there is a collection fund for that, but there's a sort of delay on you know, when we actually with regard to the sort of how the TFL work out what money we get, and so but I'll leave the Sarah to perhaps give a little bit more detail on that one.
Thank you. We'll hand over to Sarah, but then I think perhaps Councillor White might like to pick up on schools.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Moving on to Councillor Davis's point around paragraph 20 and just all of this, you're absolutely right, Councillor Davis. This is a forecast. This is the forecast of the impact of COVID on the council's financial position, what it's cost us to respond to the pandemic, the additional service demand, and our loss in income as an organisation. And the grant to 8.5 unrestricted was given in light of the council managing that. In terms of what you said about the council tax impact, that is a forecast. It's based on work of my team, but also London councils have been doing quite a lot of work to try and forecast what the likely economic recession would be and how that would impact, firstly, on council tax base growing, because we expect our council tax base to grow, and the impact is it probably won't. Also on the amount of people who are unemployed, who therefore will need to access our council reduction scheme, and that will lead to us having less council tax. So that is an estimate, and with the nature of local government finance, unfortunately, it's always complex. That will impact on us when we attempt to set our budget for 21-22, and we'll have to make that deficit good. You are right, it may well change, and I hope it does change for the better, and we will keep that forecast and that information in the monitoring, so you can see that, because I think it's important. On the parking, there are 4 separate things. The surface car parks go into the general fund, so any loss in our car parking income in car parks impacts directly on the general fund, and that is substantial. We have 3 ring-fenced accounts: on-street parking, moving traffic violations, and bus lane enforcement. And they have all, in different ways, been impacted by COVID, as well as you just saw in the further report. There are some issues around them already. And unfortunately, it will impact the general fund, because the amount that we've planned to draw down from those accounts, if we realise this income loss, exceeds what is in the accounts, or nearly exceeds it. So we're getting to the point that there will be an impact. And obviously it is quite worrying that our parking accounts will be 0, and mainly because of the impact of COVID. So that's how it impacts. But Councillor Davis is right. It is for specific types of expenditure, those 3 accounts, and we have a planned drawdown for them to fund things that are in our budget this year. I hope that helps.
Thank you very much. And I think the Chief Executive would like to add something.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. In all of this, we need to ensure that we set this into context. And, you know, Kingston's one of around 400 councils that have been affected by COVID, and the LGA estimates that although we've received 3.2 billion, we are still 6 billion short. So in a straight line analysis, that's 188% more than what most returns are reflecting. Ours reflects around 120%. So we are some way under what most authorities are reporting, or what authorities are reporting on average. I think Sarah's right. This is an early stab at it. You know, given what other authorities are reporting in terms of the impact on them, on average, you know, you can expect this to potentially increase. So, you know, what we're reporting here isn't out of kilter. You know, 120% more than the grant that we got versus the national shortfall of 188%. So that's where we sit in terms of the national picture. And I think it's important to set this within the context that we're reporting in, and to just reiterate, this is a very early stab at the analysis. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you very much. Councillor White, did you want to chip in?
Just before we go to Achieving for Children, as Councillor Davis requested, I can see where you're coming from with the question that yes, schools are empty, so presumably there's costs to be had there. But the schools still have a statutory duty to educate the children, and they're doing it in a new way, a hybrid model, and it is very it's still hard and still tough to do when they're having to educate children at home and some children in the school. There is still the EHCP to fund. The therapies are still being provided. So all of these costs are still there. They're not savings. And as you know, a lot of our very high costs are in residential placements where children are educated and cared for, and they are still ongoing as well. So whilst there might be some element of understanding that schools may not have the same costs as before, there are still a lot of areas where it's still high cost. But I don't know if Ian Dodds would like to come in on that.
Ian?
Thank you, Councillor White. I'm Ian Dodds. I'm the Director of Children's Services. So I think there is two things I would add to that, Councillor Davis. So the guidance issued by the government was very clear that we should not withdraw funding from schools, which is, as you know, provided in advance at the beginning and the middle of the year. So if we were to claw back funding, that would place schools at a disadvantage during this period. And the second is that schools have been quite creative in how they have supported children with special educational needs and disabilities, including those with education, health and care plans, by retargeting their funding, including supporting parents to support their children at home, and the use of individual learning assistants. So that work has continued to deliver education, health and care plans under the statutory duty to make all reasonable endeavours to deliver the quantified and specified education provisions set out in a child's education, health and care plan.
Just briefly come back, I must be very clear. I didn't hear anybody suggest we're going to withdraw any money from schools. I don't know where that came from, but there clearly have been savings in schools. I mean, it's just logical. So what I'm saying is that what discussions are we having with them? The fundamental one that I didn't get an answer to was on the council tax reduction scheme. So what are the numbers? How many additional people have we got on the council tax reduction scheme that weren't? And as a percentage of those that were there before, how much of an uplift is this in reality?
Sarah, are you able to?
Yeah, Councillor Davis, we've had a 111% increase in people applying to the council tax reduction scheme, and that probably matches the fact that we are aware that in Kingston, my understanding is there's been a 500% increase in universal credit applications, and I'm happy to give you more details on that on the hardship fund outside that meeting if you'd find that helpful.
Yes, please, that'd be helpful.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bass, I think you were next.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And I know this is a very early stage, but I'd just like to say thank you for bringing this forecast to this committee. I know there was some talk about perhaps delaying it to another meeting so that we have it a bit more precise. But I mean, with any forecast, it's going to be out of date the day after anyway. So it's just best that we get it early. And as Councillor Holt said, I think we'll get the first actuals, so it'll be the first 3 months we'll know the actuals, and I think that's the August R&R, but I could be corrected on that. And I'd just like to ask, so when we do have the actuals, that we can look at the forecast, you know, the ongoing forecast as well at that stage might be quite a good time to review it. Anyway, thanks to the Section 151 officer, because obviously this was a report that we also went through in detail yesterday.
I think we might have lost Councillor Bass at this point. I don't know whether she can reconnect.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can now. Actually, I'm sorry, Rowena, we're not hearing you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, I'll take out my iPod things. I thought that would be better. Yes, so it'd be good to kind of review that. So one question is, obviously this is already an out-of-date forecast, and I just wondered if there'd been any question of any major significant changes that we should be aware of since this happened. So that's one question. So it's welcome to see that we've obviously had
I'm sorry. I know Councillor Bass said at the beginning that she was worried about her broadband connection, but we do seem to be having difficulties with it. If it's acceptable, I might move on to the next.
Have a substantial amount of funding from. Okay.
Sorry, Councillor Bass, we keep losing.
I'll just come in. Maybe if Rowena turned her, sometimes it helps if you turn your video off, and then I'm afraid we won't be able to see you, but the sound may come through.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Let's have
okay,
another.
I'll try again. I had the same with Sarah Island yesterday. It's a national issue, Virgin Internet, unfortunately. Anyway, so obviously there's a lot of, as Councillor Davis said, obviously no government's going to be able to write open-ended checks, but clearly as a councillor for Kingston, obviously the more money we get, the better. And obviously it's a difficult time. I mean, this is absolutely unprecedented, and especially the fact that the whole world is in the same position, which is really quite frightening, isn't it? But I noticed we got £43 million from the government, including the £8.5 million that was sort of less specific towards the general fund. But then obviously looking at the loss of income. So on the forecast here, so on paragraph 9, it talks about the loss of income. And I think it's important to note that in that there's 2.6 million or 2.66 million, which is actually transport for London grant funding. So that's not so much the government, that is really our Mayor of London. So hopefully that won't be all at risk, but obviously that's out of the council's control. So that's up to the Labour Mayor of London. But also looking at the loss of income and all of that with parking, I think we need to be quite careful going forward that we make sure that it really is COVID related, because some of the things may be, I know like in the outturn thing, some of the loss of parking or the bus lane stuff was actually down to go cycling. So it's sort of tricky accounting, but hopefully they'll be able to keep good track of that. I had another question sort of linked to Transport for London. Now I know there've been a lot of changes to the Freedom Pass of how that can be used, and I just like, for example, the children can't use it, and well, I know that's not quite Freedom Pass, but also the times that the Freedom Pass has been allowed to be used. And I just wondered, a question is whether we'd get any money back from TfL or whatever on that. I also noticed that the CCG are expected to make a contribution. So that's somewhere in the detail there. I'm not quite sure which paragraph. So my question was, what amount are we likely to get back from the CCG and when? And maybe just my lack of understanding of how this works, but obviously there's a lot coming to this committee. But why was the amount that the CCG were liable for, why was that not agreed in advance? Yep, and I think that's all my questions for now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if colleagues would like to come in to respond to any of those particular points. If not, I'm very happy to pass on to officers. Alison, did you want to speak?
I can do some of it, but I think probably the officers might need to do some of the detail. I mean, I think the point on the CCG one for me was that we were told to help the NHS, and I believe that that it's done through a central funding, but maybe Sarah will give a little bit more information on that, so that we were told to do something and then put in the cost for it and later, and that's what we're doing. So that's why it will come later. But I think it's centrally rather than the local CCG. But I'll maybe get Sarah to confirm that. With regard to the passes, I think that does happen in a lag anyway. So in terms of it'll be the following year that we might see some changes. But that again, Councillor Gander might have some more information on that, or Sarah. And also to do with the parking, we have been looking at profiling it, splitting it into what's COVID related and not, as much as that can be. It's a difficult, we'll be done, try to do some sensitivity analysis, but it's going to be a difficult one. But to some extent, looking at last year's and looking at what the impact is this year. But that work is certainly being done. And the final bit was about, I've written down anyway, hopefully I've not missed anything else, but the final bit I had was about the forecast and coming forward with the monthly information. I think that would be definitely, I believe that will come forward in August, and I think that would be a good plan.
Sorry, Chair, can I just ask one more question? Sorry, I missed it in all the kind of getting in and out of my internet. Is that all right?
Yes, it's fine. Go ahead.
So I did have one other question. So obviously, the 1.65 million paid to care homes is obviously, supported care homes is obviously one of the key areas, and one of the areas that's been much in the press, up and down the country. So it would be really useful to have more details of exactly how that was spent. I know there's some overview in the report, but I think that's one figure that would be really useful for us to get to grips with. And could I just make a request that that's sent to members of the committee?
Thank you very much. That's noted, and I'm sure that officers will provide that information. I think that Councillor White wanted to come back on the under 18s free travel.
Thank you. Sorry, just very briefly, and Hilary may have more to say on this as well, is that is going to be phased in from September of this year. And whilst there's still a lot of detail still missing, the government has suggested that they may fund that rather than the local authority. But if they don't, it was going to have an enormous impact potentially for us.
Thank you. And Councillor Gander, I thought might want to pick that up if she has anything further to say, but also on Rowena's comment about the loss of TfL funding, particularly for the Go Cycle project. And I know that we've been quite successful in applying for funding and bidding for funding since then, but Councillor Gander has the details on that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The first thing I'd just like to start off with re-emphasising really what Councillor Holt said about the way that we distinguish the causes of our budget deficits, and that I'm confident that we are maintaining those records. In fact, we had a meeting today where it's very clearly delineated. TfL, as we know, are in a hugely bad situation. A large part of their funding comes from fares, and people haven't been on public transport. So all of our annual LIP funding, local implementation plan funding, has been withdrawn, and we are being very successful actually, and that's thanks to the officers' very hard work in getting funding according to the new rules. So, for example, not only is our LIP funding gone, but also the Go Cycle funding. But we have bid back into their temporary street space fund, which is to promote walking and cycling. And we have got £2 million back on for Go Cycle. But what we have lost is over 3 million. So we see that we will have to be doing things differently. We will have to be making different choices, maybe about treatments of surfaces, etc. But we will do our best to provide as much as we can with that funding. And we have also been getting additional funding for some of the temporary measures that we've got, for example, on Kingston Bridge, etc. We have more some more notice today for low traffic neighbourhoods. I did just want to also mention, and it's possible that there may be more detail from the officers, about, I think Councillor Bass was talking about, as we're not being, the freedom passes are being back from TfL. Obviously, the same rules apply as in TfL has difficulties, but obviously the principle is there. And we've been told, as I understand it, that it won't be this year that we will see that, but if and when it comes, and it is being talked about, it will be next year. So there will be this lag behind where TfL, before TfL will give us any money relating to that.
Thank you very much. We did a little.
Sorry, could I just do a follow up on that? So on the loss of income, there's 2.66 million. I just wondered. Well, obviously it's up to you to chair who answers it, but what exactly it is. So Transport for London grant funding. So what is it that we're actually at risk of losing?
So I think maybe best if I answer that.
Please do.
So our TfL funding is been substantially cut across many things, and Councillor Gander has given you an update on Go Cycle and the Capital programme. But within that, there is an element that funds a tremendous amount of our staff within the Highways and Environmental Shared Service, and it's funded from capital. But if we haven't got that capital, we have to fund it for general fund, and that is what that bit refers to. We're working on. And if you're happy, Chair, I'll pick up some of the questions that I think Councillor Bass would be best for me to answer. Firstly, and one of those things that has changed very late, and Councillor Gander's referred to it, with lots of negotiation with TfL, I think that figure has come down, and we're hoping it's going to come down further, and we'll report that back to you. And the other thing that's changed, which is not so good, is that the mortuary costs in London has been dialed out to all London boroughs, and that's another $500,000 that will go on. And these are very late things that happen. Very difficult to do that paper now, because it'd be very confusing for everybody to do, but we'll keep you updated on that. On the CCG, it is a route key. It was a claim system. It wasn't like local government who had unrestricted grant. Councillor Holt has told you this was an emergency. There was fears of a surge, and local government was instructed to protect the NHS, and that is what we did. And that amount of money we've put in is about 1.8 million. But until we have that claim, it would be wrong of me to show that in these figures. Echo the parking. The parking model is very, very good. I wanted it to be very good because if MHCLG start to look at individual local authorities for a deal or a support, I want us to have the strongest evidence base that we've done this in the fair and right way, and that we're not throwing the kitchen sink into it or not recognising our other problems that existed with COVID or not. So I think I've picked up everything. If there's anything I missed, Councillor Bass, please let me know.
Thank you very much. That was good, and I'll just get the other things sent. So great, thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Cobbett, you were next.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll start with a comment and then finish with the questions. Thanks very much to Councillor Holt and the officers for the report. I think the report sets out very clearly the nature of the position we're in, and I think that's, even though it's in an early stage and the detail may change, I think the sort of shape of the situation we're in is certainly starting to emerge from this report, and that's really important to note, because I think a lot of people, local government finance probably isn't wouldn't be the topic of pub conversation even if pubs were open, and a lot of people won't understand the ins and outs of what this would mean for our budget, and I think that's why this report's quite important. It talks about the grants we've had from central government, and as Councillor Holt said, clearly we're in a better position having had those than if they hadn't been provided, and they have allowed us to work quickly, get money out the door for particular sectors, whether it's the care sector or the voluntary sector or to our businesses, but they are ring-fenced for that purpose, and they definitely don't account for all of the financial impact of COVID, as the paper makes clear. There is the money we've spent helping businesses and residents through council tax business rates, essentially less collection because we're helping them to get through the crisis. There's the work we are unable to do on some of our savings as quickly as we would have done because we've rightly refocused, repurposed our activity around responding to the crisis. And there is also the loss of income as well. And, you know, I think this really is the central point from all of this, because we were told as a council, but councils the country was told, or ever seen before, the normal rules don't really apply. You must do what you can. You must do what you need to do to help your community, and that we'll have you covered. And then they've since, you know, gradually recoiled from that. And I'm tempted to say that I'm shocked, but I suspect that Councillor Falchikoff-Sumner has that I'm trademarked by now at these meetings. And probably, to be honest, I'm not shocked in any case, because I think we're used to local government being treated in this way by central government, but I am certainly disappointed. And this isn't really a political point, because actually it isn't something that I'm just saying, or that Liberal Democrat councils, run councils are saying, or Labour run councils are saying. It's actually the LGA, the political side of the LGA is majority Conservative, and there are district councils and county councils run by the Conservatives all over the country that are saying to the minister, to the local government department, you know, what do you actually expect us to do about this? Because they know the kind of important services that local government provides to its communities and the difficult situation that's going to leave us in. That really leads me to my questions. The first, I suppose, is that I think, you know, this is, if there's ever going to be a good time for local government working together in terms of lobbying and pressuring central government, this would be it. So for any plans that you've got to spend time on joining in with campaigns with London councils and the LGA to get us the best possible return from central government, because I think any time we can spend on that will be time well spent. But secondly, around, you know, the paper obviously notes that we're now going to have to consider some spending restraint and some difficult financial decisions that, were it not for the COVID situation, we wouldn't have been considering. And it's inevitable that we will have to do that. But what's really important to me is that if we do have to have these big conversations about how we deliver services differently, our residents and our community must be involved in that. So really just to, you know, I've obviously got ideas for that in my own area, but just to really ask for others' ideas and for any support for involving residents in that thinking, and in making sure that we don't just lobby government, but we run a kind of public education campaign around the situation that local government is in and why that matters. And then my third question is just around the Kingston Stronger Together hub. We often talk about our response to COVID and about the hub, but people watching this meeting, if indeed anybody is watching this meeting, might not know what's actually involved in that, or what bits of that response were the council. So I think it'd be useful to have a bit of a breakdown of what we spent on the Kingston Stronger Together hub, why we needed to do that, and what the kind of community benefit of that spend was. Thanks.
Thank you. That was quite a long question, but I'll do my best to have a go at some parts of it at least. In terms of local government working together, I absolutely agree that this is what we need to do, and it needs to be cross-party. As has already been stated tonight, the Local Government Association, the LGA, says that local government needs £6 billion to get over the shortfall. I mean, I don't know whether people saw today, there was a BBC investigation which had found that 148 councils across the country were suffering a shortfall. It quoted Birmingham City Council, which has a shortfall of £212 million. Obviously, quite a significantly bigger council than Kingston, I know. But this is not something that is peculiar to Kingston, and this is something that I think I would really like if we could have cross-party consensus on the need to lobby government to step up, as they promised at the time that that this crisis was just beginning. And I certainly sat in on calls with Robert Jenrick, where he said, as is quoted, you know, just get on with the job, just do it, don't stop because of money, we will look after you. And I would just make the plea that if any of us don't argue for that money, it's almost as though we're not defending the rights of our own residents to services, because I quite understand that we can't ask for an open cheque, but we do need to ask for help so that we can continue to provide the services that are needed. In terms of, you know, how are we going to set about putting our budgets to rights? I think maybe this is one for Sarah to talk to more specifically, or perhaps Councillor Holt would like to pick it up. But I mean, we've already said a recruitment freeze on non-essential recruitment. We're looking at everything at the moment. We're looking, for instance, at the needs that the council has for office space. People have worked remotely, and we're now looking at whether we need the amount of office space that we currently have. I think in every area we are going to have to look really sharply at our own expenditure to see if there are savings that we can make, to make those savings without disadvantaging our residents. But as Councillor Cobbett says, it is going to require a great deal of engagement with our residents so that they understand why this might be necessary. And finally, on the hub, I'm glad that you asked about the hub, because there have been, suggestions that our hub didn't work well, and I absolutely refute them. We had almost 6,000 people on the shielded list in Kingston. We contacted every person on that list. In many cases, we went back. We actually made a provision to go back every 3 weeks to check up that they were okay. We had 2,500 requests for help. Of the help that we gave 500. On 500 occasions, we picked up medicines for people. We provided 15,000 frozen meals. 2,500 food parcels were delivered. We did shopping trips for people who actually didn't have a financial need but just weren't able to leave their home. We put 176 people in touch with a buddy, people who were finding that they were really suffering, their mental health was suffering as a result of the isolation that was imposed on them. In all, more than 9,500 calls have been made. I could go on. This has been an incredible logistical challenge out of nowhere to put this kind of support in place. And now, the situation is changing again, and obviously the way the hub works will change again. But I think that it's something that we can all applaud the officers for the efforts that they made, and of course, huge applause to the most amazing volunteers who have done absolutely tremendous work in our borough. And I think that when you talk to some of them, they will tell you that this borough has actually done such a good job that other boroughs are, kind of looking at it and thinking that's phenomenal. How could we do the same? So I think there's a great deal that we should be grateful for in that. I don't know whether any officers would like to pick up on any of Councillor Cobbett's points. No, in that case, Councillor Schaefer, I think you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a quick comment and a couple of small questions, and the second one might probably be more applicable to the following report. But it's really just an observation, first of all, just to say that I think it's going to be really interesting. This is looking at the area of point 8, the increased service demand. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how we can achieve efficiencies and issues like sustainability and capacity when looking at staff requirements, because I think this is important in a way that it looks at how we are working, how we've worked through the pandemic with providers. We're working closely with them, they're working closely with us. We're looking at issues of workforce support and also partnership working. And I think looking at the increased service demand particularly, I was interested just to see how fairly closely aligned the increased demand for placements is with additional staffing. I think if you look at those figures, so I think that as part of the observation, but I think the question for me is when you're looking at the additional contractual costs of agency staff, and clearly, we've been in unprecedented times. I think my question is, would there be a strategy of such that can offer us efficiencies when we look particularly in the need for, say, recruitment drive that would minimise the need for agency staff? Because clearly we've identified it as an area where we have incurred additional costs. And I think that's one of the questions. The other one is that I've picked up on really is to what degree can other providers access wider government funding? Because clearly if we're working in partnership, it isn't something that we're taking responsibility as a local authority to look at recruitment, but also I think I think officers touched on it this week in the safeguarding workshop about the idea of how we learn from this and how we move forward. So I think that may be touched on in the next report, but I'm just interested to see how we look at recruitment, and also clearly how we're working together with other providers and sharing a level of responsibility. So I'd be interested from an efficiency perspective, but also from a partnership view, how we can look at efficiencies like staffing moving forward. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I don't know whether one of the officers would like to pick up those points.
Chair, I'm happy to answer the question about recruitment. Obviously, as you're quite right, councillors, you know, at the time there were lots of people trying to recruit from the same pool of staff, and it was difficult. But the council has a framework agreement and works very closely with recruitment providers, and we probably got the best deal that we could. I wouldn't tell you there wasn't a premium in that, but there would be. I think you will touch on the support that's been given, particularly to providers in the care market in the next report, and that is throughout some of the spending and forecast you see in this report, but particularly it's just to remind the committee that there is 1.651 million which has 4 care homes which the council is acting as the agent to passport it to, and I'm sure my colleagues will talk about that, and I think the Director of Public Health may want to say something as well.
Thank you. Iona, I see that you would like to comment.
Yes, and I think it's reflecting on that learning so far and using opportunities that come through. So one example is we had to boost our support to our domestic violence hub. We recognised that during lockdown we were getting more calls and we needed to shore that up. But one of the outcomes from that is an opportunity to bid for funding with the Department for Work and Pensions. So we're going to be submitting a bid from that. So that will mean that support will continue, but it won't be funded from the council's monies. So it's that learning that we're using to make other opportunities possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there are no other speakers, and I don't see any other speakers, I will now take the vote. I will take the recommendations en bloc unless a colleague indicates to the contrary in the chat function, and I'll pause for a few seconds to allow that. And if we're content that everyone's happy to go to the vote, I'll ask Fiona, please, to ask each member how they wish to vote.
Thank you, Chair. As before, I'll call the names, and if you could indicate for, against or abstain. Councillor Shaper.
For, thank you.
Councillor Bass.
For.
Councillor Cobbett.
For.
Councillor Davey.
For.
Councillor Davis.
For, but I'm a bit confused. I thought we were going to do this en bloc, so I'm not sure why we're voting. Anyway.
Councillor Gander.
For.
Councillor Holt.
For.
Councillor Kerr.
For.
Councillor Moll.
For.
Councillor Self.
For.
Councillor White.
For.
Thank you. That is unanimous.
Thank you very much, Fiona. So that recommendation is agreed. At this point, I don't know whether colleagues would like to have their short comfort break or whether you'd like to plough on and do another item first. It's 9:05. If people would like to have a little break now, we could break for 5 minutes. Is that enough? Would people like longer? Should we say that we reconvene at 10 minutes past 9? Is that okay? Thank you. So that's a short adjournment until 21:10.
I will just speak to IT and I'll let you know when we're ready to go.
Thank you very much.
Chair, to confirm we are now streaming to YouTube.
Thank you very much. So we're now moving to item 6 on the agenda, the response to COVID-19 in care homes in the Royal Borough of Kingston upon Thames. I asked for this report. We know that this paper has been written in the context that we're still in the pandemic and that the data and understanding of COVID-19 is still emerging. But I felt it was important in the context of national concern about the number of people who have become infected in our care homes. It's important that we pause at this point, reflect on the emerging data that we have, share the work of the council so far, how it has worked as part of the wider health and care system, and the areas of learning that we will take into our planning in our ongoing care management plans. The paper sets out some key facts about the size of the care market in Kingston, with a specific focus on our care homes. For many, it's often not clear about the responsibilities of a council and the responsibilities of the CQC in a market that is mainly provided by the independent sector. As we know, some people within care homes in Kingston have died of COVID-19, and we have included the emerging data in this paper. The number counted as 34. I know that every one of those lives was precious, that they were people's mothers, fathers, grandparents, friends. And I think that we all feel rather sobered by that, by the knowledge that 34 people died in our care homes during this period. The market itself, the care market, has been resilient and has responded well during this crisis. And I hope that the paper does justice to that. Equally, our own council workforce has worked tirelessly to support the care market, and particularly our care homes. I hope this paper reflects the efforts, demonstrates that we have responded to government guidance rapidly, and also worked across our health and social care systems in partnership, including with colleagues in the voluntary sector. We have learnt some lessons, and these will be built into our care home outbreak management plans and how we've implemented our infection control fund. We've published our COVID-19 Adult Social Care Action Plan, and whilst we recognise the significant challenges that face the care market going forward, I hope that this paper is focused on the good work that's been achieved while recognising the reflections which need to be taken into our future plans. I don't know whether Iona, as an officer, would like to add anything to that.
Thank you, Leader. Just to echo the tremendous efforts that have gone in, it's completely recognised that people over 80 are 70 times more likely to die from COVID-19 than those who are under 40. So they're disproportionately affected. And I think the report obviously goes through the work that's been done in a very much a multi-agency approach and supporting our care home market. And also that work across the different parts of the council, so adult social care colleagues, public health, data and insight, the mutual aid that we've offered in terms of our PPE support, and that's all summarised within the report. And again, very much echoing the learning nature of this, so that as we go forward, we're using that learning for any potential second wave and feeding into our outbreak management plans, which feeds into the next item on the agenda. But just to give that context to the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iona. I'll now move the recommendations at the front of the report on page C1. Councillor Self, would you second them, please?
Yes, I'm happy to second. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And any councillors who would like to speak? I see that Councillor Davis wishes to speak. If there are any others, I will ask Fiona to make a note. But for the moment, Councillor Davis.
Thanks. It's more a series of questions actually than a comment. I think as far as the report sort of speaks for itself. But I mean, there's a couple of things I just wanted to ask. On the distribution of grant to care homes, the fact that we took a single point in time and then distributed 30% seems to indicate there was no targeting behind that. And I just wonder whether, in hindsight, we still think that was the correct approach, whether it would have been better to be a bit more sort of strategic about it rather than just taking a cake and just dividing it up equally amongst everybody as a model of making that work. I'd also like to know how much additional care home capacity we purchased in the market at the beginning of the outbreak and through the outbreak, and also how much of that was utilised. So did we buy more than we needed, or did we buy less than we needed? Because obviously it was at a premium, I imagine. So it would be helpful to understand that. Given that local authorities are essentially, obviously in liaison with the health service, responsible for discharge into care, it would be really helpful to understand a bit more about the process that we went through in Kingston, as opposed to other local authorities necessarily, around when we placed people from being discharged from hospital into care settings, as to what was done around testing. I know that there was discussion about buying another hotel or some other form of care that could be provided that wasn't discharging into care homes. So it'd be helpful to understand why we didn't take that approach if it was on offer. So just to try and understand that. It would also be helpful to understand how many care homes outside of the borough that we currently put people under RBK care into, and also then, can we confirm that none of our grant was spent in those care homes, that it was restricted only to RBK care homes, because obviously funding was distributed to other boroughs to support the care homes in their local authority areas. So it'd be helpful to know that we didn't sort of unfortunately subsidise things that we didn't need to subsidise. And then finally, I'd just like a bit of an understanding about what next. I mean, the report talks about second peak planning, and I know that the director has just referred to that. But it would be very, very helpful on the assumption that, I mean, it is an assumption because we don't know, if there was to be a second peak, which we hope there isn't. One of the objectives has got to be trying to keep the economy going while shielding the vulnerable. So it would be how we would understand that would happen, given the context of where we currently are, would be very useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davis. There are some of those I can pick up and others that I would prefer to ask officers to look at. Your first point, that there seemed to be no targeting of the distribution of grant in the first tranche. You and I were both consulted about that because it occurred under the emergency provisions of the Constitution. All I would say, I'm sure that Iona will pick this up in more detail, but all I would say is that I think we should remember what the state of affairs was at that time. And it's very easy in hindsight to kind of examine whether this was done, in an absolutely perfect way. I'm not saying that it wasn't, but all I would say is that the very clear instruction from central government was to prevent the NHS from falling over. And one of the ways that we were to do that was to support the care sector. And that was a really essential task at that point. You've asked about whether we over-purchased in capacity terms, and I feel I do need to ask Iona to look at that. On the discharge process, and where we placed people and what we did about testing, that's been probably the thing that has worried me and concerned me most since I became leader. I was really concerned 3 days in to discover that the government's instruction, which was, I know, intended to keep the NHS safe, was also has the potential to endanger people in care homes. I was really concerned about that, and I talked with officers about it at length. You asked why we didn't purchase rooms in a hotel. We didn't do that because we used Teddington Memorial Hospital, and anybody we knew to be COVID positive was discharged into Teddington Memorial Hospital and not into a care home. What I would say is that we have to see this in the national context, where there was utterly inadequate testing available for much of the crisis. 25,000 people in a 6-week period were transferred nationally from hospitals into care homes, and many of them were not tested. To be fair, we didn't know that asymptomatic, that the disease could be asymptomatic at that time. But there is, I think there is a national inquiry that is that's going to examine how our care homes were made so vulnerable, and the residents in those care homes were left so vulnerable by a national policy that discharged people from hospitals before testing had been done. But in Kingston, we never knowingly did that, and we used Teddington Memorial Hospital to protect people from that. And in the period discussed in this report, only 4 people were discharged from hospital into care homes. You've asked a question about how many care homes outside RBK our residents have homes in, and I don't know the answer to that. I will have to ask Iona to deal with that and with the question of the second surge. So Iona, please.
Thank you, Leader. I'm going to ask my colleague Helen.
We've lost Iona, but I heard enough to know. Sorry, I heard enough to know that Helen Coombs is now wishing to speak. So Helen, please.
Good evening. I'm Helen Coombs, Interim Strategic Commissioning for Adult Social Care. So I'm hoping that I'm answering what Iona is expecting me to ask. So I'll just start with that 30% initial grant payment that we made. There were a number of approaches that councils used. We used that one because it was a way of just recognising right at the beginning of the particularly acute phase that some providers might be struggling more than others, particularly with immediate cash flow issues. And you've got quite an unusual market in Kingston, particularly in terms of your home care. And we wanted to just make a gesture that was fair to all providers, but acknowledge that for some, there would be immediate cash flow issues. It was based on a 30% of their previous invoice. So there was a methodology behind it, and it was aimed at those people, those providers who have been loyal to RBK and have provided a service to publicly funded care in Kingston. In hindsight, was it the right thing to do? I think it was the right thing to do. Now we know more about the financial implications of the pandemic on care providers. We may do something different if that cash was allocated again to local government. What we do know, and I hope that's illustrated in the adult social care plan, that providers generally really welcomed it. On the second point, in terms of pre-purchasing, at the beginning of the pandemic, we were using an NHS model that did predict significant capacity was required in the care market, particularly in the care homes. We explored with providers who was willing to work with us. We explored price, and we also explored the terms and conditions that they would be looking for. At the same time, we knew that the local CCG was negotiating to bring more capacity through its community health provider. We didn't purchase any additional care that hasn't been used, and I think that was the right decision, given what has now become really clear is that even when people are over the acute phase of the virus, they are often very frail and need quite intensive support. I think one of the other questions you asked was about how many RBK people are located outside of the borough. So RBK has always used a 25-mile radius to offer people publicly funded placements. I can't give you the actual data, but I can get that to you in writing to the committee after this meeting. And then lastly, I'd just like to, because it is quite confusing, just to be really clear that the infection control fund payments that we are now making are not just targeted at those providers that we work with and have publicly funded, but are irrespective. So they go to homes where they may only have self-funded people and have no relationship with RBK. The methodology is that every council across the country passports that money to the registered beds in its area that it is responsible for. And that's a reflection of the fact that all councils may have care homes within their borough where other councils or self-funders are living, and it was to try and ensure that there wasn't a duplication of payments. So it was based on a registered bed within your borough. So I hope that's answered all the questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lida. I was going to just come up with a last point about the future learning and second wave planning. Switch my video off so that's a little bit less echoey. So just to be clear, our outbreak control plan that we're developing includes provision for outbreak management plans for care homes. Clearly, we don't want to have outbreaks in our care homes, and the more we can keep COVID-19 out of a home, the better. But that is a challenge, given we've heard that people can be asymptomatic. We have routine testing of all staff and all residents in care homes, and that's been undertaken across our care homes in Kingston, and it's rolling out to our learning disabilities and other care provision. And that's a useful tool to try and pick up those asymptomatic members of staff or residents so that we can isolate them, have them recover. So it's using that learning from the first wave to have these outbreak management plans in place, to use testing appropriately and get ahead of the curve and prevent outbreaks happening in our care homes. And that's a similar methodology we'll be using in other settings across the borough.
If I could just come back briefly, I think it's fascinating, isn't it, that local authorities did not have to discharge into care homes. They could have discharged to where they had, and it's good that Kingston didn't. I mean, I applaud that, but it's a shame that other councils didn't follow suit in that in some respects. My signal sort of dropped out slightly when around the number of care homes care home places that were purchased. I thought I heard that there were no places that we purchased additional. Is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you. And I think Ian Thomas would like to come back in as well.
Yeah, thanks, Lida. Just to point and direct members to the adult care plan, which was circulated as a late item. And I commend it to you. It's got key stats in there in terms of numbers of providers who we've supported, cost information, and the timeline, which is really important in terms of what was happening. Remember, this happened at the height of the pandemic, something that we'd never done before, all happening in real time, with government guidance confusing and in many cases late. We know now that many care homes have gone to the wall and are suffering. And I think on reflection, this council moved quickly and operated proactively to support the care market. And I draw your attention actually in terms of, rather than the quantitative statistics, look at the qualitative stats, the feedback we've had from our care homes and our providers, and that gives you a sense of how much our support has been appreciated. So draw your attention to that. Thanks to all the officers for working incredibly hard. It's easy now to sort of reflect on it once the moment's passed, but in that moment when it was the height of the crisis, the height of the pandemic, this reflects a very, very impressive response from this council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. Councillor Shaper, I think you were next.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a quick comment and a question. I think I was just drawn to the area of reflection, really, point 75, because I think it's such an important point about gathering data, and this idea that you can have during this pandemic, we've had an opportunity to learn from how we use data effectively and in an efficient way. And I think what I'm really interested in is just making the point about a shared data set, about sharing insight. And I think leading on from that, really looking at most efficient way of working, but also finding solutions, looking through issues like best practice, but also focusing on what's important for residents and how you can really target your help and support in the best way possible. So I think leading on from that, how you capture the data and how we want to utilise it moving forward. For me, I was interested in knowing whether we got an idea of how much resource it's taken to do the digital forums. I can see that they were done weekly during the pandemic and lessened somewhat. But for me, it's interesting that whether we can learn from the resource implication of that moving forward, and whether we continue to do something similar and what the cost of that might be. And I think I'd be really interested to know, as we look ahead, whether we can use that as a basis moving forward. I'd be really interested to know if we've got costs for the digital forums, and whether, as I say, as we move forward, whether we can, and we go through that learning curve, that sort of period of reflection, whether we can draw on that data. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Schaper. Iona, would you like to pick up on that?
Yes, I think we've learned a tremendous amount through this first wave, and I think working with our partners, there's much of that we obviously want to maintain and keep using going forward. So the data sharing, particularly with our health colleagues, so GP data, CCG data, we have developed a shared dashboard that we're populating, and that gives us much more real-time data to be able to see a lens across our care homes. But that will be useful for our quality metrics. We're looking to have safeguarding information on their number of safeguarding alerts, so both quantitative and qualitative data. So the impetus of responding to the pandemic has brought that on leaps and bounds, but it's a way of working that we wouldn't want to lose. Also, in terms of the plethora of communication, it became clear it was better to have one stream of communication, so both joining the NHS information out to care homes as well as the information that we're producing as a council. So having a shared newsletter that goes from a single inbox to a single inbox, so people recognise it as a quality source of information to read it, and we have got metrics to show how, if it's opened by a care home or not, so we can follow up to say, we didn't open your Friday newsletter, can we have a chat about the contents? In terms of the digital webinars, so we did infection control training as webinars shared across homes. We also did these regular updates, and they're actually an incredibly cost-effective way of getting that message out. And the feedback from the care market was really positive. It meant they could ask questions, apply it to their own home, and that individualisation of messages was really helpful. If they weren't clear on something, they could ask questions. So I think it is a model that we would use going forward, and it's actually a very cost-effective model. I don't have, finance to say. Obviously, there's officer time, there's the care home staff time, but actually in comparison with arriving at a meeting and all the travel time, it is a very cost-effective way. So we will be using the learning for our work and engagement with care homes as we go forward in the care home market across the board, not just our care homes themselves, but also residential care, domiciliary care too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iona. Councillor Bass, I think you were next.
Thank you, Chair. And obviously it's good that we're getting information now on the care homes and what's been happening in this sector. I know I did ask questions about it at the last R&R, but those were put off obviously to this meeting because there is a report in the offing. So, I mean, it's obviously good to have the information, but we are 4 months in. We did have to wait quite a long time to get sort of much colour at all on this. And I know that our group has been consistent in asking for metrics just to kind of really get an idea of what was going on, because I think we felt as councillors, as opposition councillors, I don't know whether backbenchers on the administration feel the same, but as opposition councillors, we felt really quite distant from it and kept a bit in the dark, really. So we are getting more information this time, and I do recognise, Councillor Schaper, you have a really deep deep interest, active interest in this, and you're really pursuing lots of questions and everything like that. But you are the administration, so I'm still very disappointed that we're not having a formal health overview panel and health and wellbeing or combined boards. I mean, we have a governance for a reason. You know, these things are set up in a certain format for a reason, and to kind of do it in a different way. For example, this week I know we had a workshop of the Health and Wellbeing Board with the adult partnership, but a workshop's not the same as a proper Health and Wellbeing Board. And we're having a briefing next week's combined HOP, Health Overview Panel and Health and Wellbeing Board. But that is not the same as the governance structures we have. Now, I know that you'll say that, and I do appreciate, and I do really appreciate the work that the office is doing. I think, you know, it is unprecedented times and they are working exceptionally hard. But I do know on the counter to that, there are other councils that are having these meetings, and I've spent a lot of time talking to Centre of Public Scrutiny, and they very much urge that formal scrutiny is carried on. Because at a time where we have massive change like this and sort of extraordinary, used in the way that it's not ordinary expenditure and activities, that is when there's the most risk. So I think we do have a really important part to play in that. So my question is, when will we have a formal health scrutiny? You know, it's so important, and we said that at full council, and I'll keep repeating it because I think unless we do it properly, we're not really going to get the deep dive questions and answers that we need. Anyway, so that's on that. Sorry to sound like a broken record on that point, but I do feel it's really important. On the other thing, clearly the care sector has been disproportionately affected, and in a large part that is due to the virus that's very sadly affects elderly people a lot more. And also, you know, we're learning a lot more about the virus as we go along. And, you know, for anyone who has lost a loved one in this borough, whether it's in health, whether it's in care homes or elsewhere, I think we all send out our, you know, commiserations to their families. It's a terrible, terrible thing. But I just wanted to add to what Councillor Davis said. It would be really useful to have to know a little bit more about the process for that discharge from hospitals. I mean, I did hear from a resident that someone had, that it was a relative of theirs had been tested before they were moved out of the hospital, but the result didn't come through until after they were in the care home. Now, I know that's anecdotal, but it'd be useful to have assurance that there were controls to make sure that test results were received before they were moved into the care home. Another thing, so metrics are a really good way of us to, you know, as councillors, so that we can keep an eye on this area. And this virus, although it's abating in this part due to the nice weather, it's not, hasn't completely gone away. So I think it's really important that we can keep tabs on this. And my plea is that we'll get metrics on a month to each R&R on this high risk area. And it may be in the report that Ian Thomas, the Chief Executive, was referring to. I haven't had a chance to look at the late material. There were hundreds of pages on this this alone, on the stuff we had in advance. But it would be useful to know sort of the total care home residents in the borough that we're looking after. How many of those have been tested with COVID? And then obviously, sadly, deaths. And it'd be useful to that on a monthly basis so that we can see, keep track of this high risk area. And then my other question is on testing. I know we've covered this a bit, but it'd be useful to have more detail on that. And for example, assurance that all care home staff have been tested and how often, and what are the procedures. And this has been in the press a lot about care home staff that are transferring in between care homes. I know that's a bit of a risk, and how that's dealt with in our borough. Thank you. Sorry, it's a lot of questions, but it's an important area and we haven't really had a chance to address it before.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bass. I hope the flight overhead isn't disturbing you and you can hear me properly. I will just pick up some of those, but I know that Helen Coombs would like to pick many of them up too. You mentioned at the beginning that it's been 4 months and that you haven't had information. First of all, it might feel like 4 months, but it's actually only been 3 months. I don't think we have gone 4 months yet. You were worried about the fact that you hadn't had information. I think we should be fair here. This data has only recently become available, and we have been in an emergency. And we are, as far as I know, we're the first local authority to commission and publish a report on how our care home sector coped during the emergency. So I really don't think we've been tardy on this. If anything, I think we're probably ahead of the game on it. I know that you're very concerned about the Health and Wellbeing Board not meeting formally, but I hoped that you would be reassured that on the 21st of July, we will be having a joint meeting of the Health and Wellbeing Board and HOP. And certainly when I spoke to the co-chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board, he was satisfied that that would be a very useful meeting. You've asked a lot of questions about testing and the specifics of testing. I'm very happy to pass over to officers to deal with that in detail. But I do think that it's impossible to talk about testing in one local authority without really understanding what was happening in testing right across the country. And there was inadequate testing. I mean, if you look at any newspaper coverage of this, if you look at select committee appearances on this, it's unequivocally true that there was not mass testing. And as a result of that, it was very difficult. We were lucky in some ways because we had testing for our care workers in Chessington, and we were the first in London to have that facility. But there was no testing, for instance, for residents in care homes. So testing was not adequate. You ask about how long did the testing take? Well, we had no control over how long the testing took. We were not doing the testing ourselves. And I have also heard anecdotally about other hospitals where testing took so long that a whole area of staff became infected, even though they were supposed to be dealing with patients who were not suffering from coronavirus. So the testing regime was a national issue and not something that I think you can lay at the door of the Royal Borough of Kingston upon Thames. But I'm very happy to pass on to officers. I think, is it Helen Coombs who would like to pick this up?
Yeah, so I'll pick up the specific points around the care homes and particularly some of the issues around the staff moving around and the infection control funds and leave Iona to talk about the testing a little bit more. On page 65, there is an attachment that talks about the infection control fund. And in there, you're absolutely right. There are a number of areas where we have been asked to particularly work with care homes around their ability to isolate residents within their own homes, their actions that they are taking to restrict staff movement between care homes, and the work that they are doing to also make sure that staff are paid when they are off sick and those things. This action plan we had to publish on our website and was implemented over the last few weeks. So I think one of the lessons learned right from the beginning of this, and this is a national issue, is there probably wasn't enough focus at a very local level on some of these measures. And those measures are now in place and we are monitored very carefully on our support to care homes, and they have received an initial payment to support these measures, and then they will receive another payment at the end of this month if they have entered the data onto the National Capacity Tracker and confirmed that they are compliant. So in terms of those issues going forward, I think that we have now much a stronger set of data, but also care homes are very, very clear about their responsibilities in terms of managing infection going forward. I don't know about the particular issue in terms of an individual being discharged from hospital into a care home, and that their test results weren't there when they were through by the time they received into the care home. What I am really, really clear about is that we were supportive of all care homes in that they had the right to refuse a discharge if they didn't feel confident that they were able to support somebody coming into their care home who may or may not have had an infection, and that they had the ability to isolate them. So our message right from the beginning of this with all care homes is that it is your choice, and most of them close to admissions completely. But if you do take somebody into your home, have you got the capacity and the physical environment that you can manage for them to isolate? Now, clearly, we now know a little bit more about the infection, and we know how it can linger a little bit longer. But right the way through this, the local authority has been really clear with care homes that they do not have to accept admissions if they do not want to. So I hope those answers the areas. I'm more than happy to have a discussion with anybody about the detail in this template, because I do appreciate it is quite complicated, and even we've been working with this day in, day out, and we're still getting familiar with some of the detail in it.
And if I could pick up the testing element then, just to finish off those questions. So yes, I mean, testing has been a frustration, the lack of testing, adequate numbers early on. Now we do have adequate testings, but it's deployed through different routes. So if a care home has a suspected case, and it's a very low threshold for care homes because we know that older people have potentially very mild symptoms. So if someone's under the weather, we can contact the London Coronavirus Response Cell, who will arrange testing. If nobody has any symptoms at all, there is another route to order testing, and that is a blanket testing for all residents and all staff, and the tests are delivered to the home, they're left and then collected. So there are various routes now open to care homes. They don't normally recommend doing the testing more than on a monthly basis, but clearly if you had a new outbreak, you would be ringing the London Coronavirus Response Cell, and that's all in our guidance to care homes. We talk to them about that. It will be part of their outbreak management plan, and similarly within those plans are recommendations about staff not circulated between homes, and that's monitored. That was clearly picked up early as a risk, and we talk to our homes about that, and that's kept to an absolute minimum if it's happening at all. And actually, when we've spoken to our homes, even those that have got bank staff, actually it's bank staff that have been using for years and years, and actually we know a huge amount more about our care homes and our care home staff than we did clearly prior to the pandemic hitting. So yes, testing is available now. I can't say it's without problems. We have had batches of tests fail, and you have to use different types of tests for different care homes. So for our dementia care homes, we're just using nasal swabs, not throat swabs. So again, that type of information has to be important to make sure the right swabs are ordered. But it is far better than it was, and this blanket testing is making a huge difference.
Thank you, Anna. Good to hear.
Thank you. Can I just say, and I think it's the one thing that's particularly reassuring is that you're giving guidance about people not working across different care homes, because that certainly, works against logic, doesn't it? And also it was in the press, so thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Holt, I think you had a question.
I did have a question, but I think Iona's probably covered it, because it was actually just to say I had been in my ward, have actually got quite a number of care homes, and I had actually spent some time calling them all just to see how they were coping. And the thing that was coming through very loud and clear to me was, because I did ask, how they felt the council was responding, and it was very clear to me that they were extremely happy with the service that they were getting at that time. The area that there was more concerns over, they were able to get testing for their staff, it was actually the time it took for the test to come back was an issue, and also getting, and it seemed to be very variable whether they got tests for the patient. So I think probably I was going to ask that question. Was that about I was hoping that improved, because I think it was done centrally initially, and that wasn't working as well as it could have done, and I think then the local councils were asked to step in and help there to make sure that it would run in a more smooth way. So I think that was probably answered by Iona. But again, I would like to thank our care workers in our community, because they actually were it's a very, very difficult time that they were and they're having to deal with things like ourselves, and it is very difficult when you've got the patients have got different levels of dementia or disabilities or whatever it is, but they're having to go in every day to an environment. Thankfully they seem to have a lot of PPE equipment, which was also very good to hear, but that they are going in to work with the patients who are a bit sort of a little bit sort of muddled about what's going on and why their sort of routine has changed, and then having to go back home again. So I really would just like to express my thanks to the work that was going on, and the managers of the homes I spoke to seemed to be extremely caring and really conscious of the fact that their staff, the well-being of their staff was as important as the well-being of the residents that they had in their home.
Thank you very much, and I'd absolutely agree with that. I think any of us who've had a relative in a care home knows that it takes a very special person.
So, sound.
Sorry, I pressed the button. It's too sensitive. If nobody else has any comments, I think that we may be ready to go to a vote. As this is an item to note, we don't perhaps need to take a roll call unless somebody wants it. If anybody feels that they would like to do the roll call, please could you say it in the chat? Otherwise, I might assume that this one can be passed without a roll call vote. No comments. I think that means that we have noted this item, and we can move on to the next item on the agenda. So bear with me a second. So now we're at item 7, which is keeping Kingston safe, the track and trace and local outbreak control plans. And this is, again, I'm sorry, I'm slightly, you might have to bear with me a minute while I try to find my notes. So Iona's going to speak on this in a second, but I'm very pleased to introduce the paper on the next phase in the Kingston response to the COVID-19 pandemic to keep Kingston safe. As we're aware, thanks to the efforts of our residents and of people up and down the country in respecting the lockdown and following social distancing and other measures, cases of coronavirus have thankfully reduced. However, we're by no means out of the woods. We're in a critical situation where the virus is continuing to circulate nationally and in Kingston, although at lower levels. We can visualise these remaining cases of COVID infections as the glowing embers after a major blaze. Our challenge is to prevent a second blaze restarting. This paper, entitled Keeping Kingston Safe, sets out how we can and must support the local and national effort to prevent those embers turning into the blaze. 4 activity areas are set out. 1, encouraging our residents to get tested if they have symptoms. The National Track and Trace team will then contact their contacts, and we must find all cases in Kingston. Number 2, supporting people who must isolate with any help that they need. Number 3, developing outbreak management plans, and 4, implementing those plans if needed. We all have a role to play in sharing key messages with our constituents and through our member organisations, following national guidance on staying safe to prevent catching COVID and making sure that anyone in Kingston who has symptoms gets tested. We're asking all the partners in the Health and Wellbeing Board to support this proposal and to take the role of also being the local outbreak engagement board, providing political ownership and public-facing engagement and communication for outbreak responses, ensuring that residents with symptoms do get tested. Iona, would you like to pick up?
Thank you, Lida. You summarised it very well. So this has been a very rapidly moving piece. As we know, the National Contact Tracing Programme launched on the 28th of May. And at the same time, we were tasked at local authority level to develop these outbreak control plans, which is an overarching plan on how we'll work together with our partners to do those 4 tasks that you've outlined. And a key part of that will be using a common set of communication messages to really encourage people to get tested, because that then affords the opportunity for this contact tracing and to get on top of any little outbreak and suppress it, so you don't see that onward transmission and the R level that we've heard so much about start to climb again. So this is our route to return to a more of normality, more releasing of lockdown and not having to reverse on that. So it's only a short paper. It outlines our plans. Strands within the overarching plan will be area specific outbreak management plans. So as we've heard, in care homes, in schools and nurseries, in workforce settings, and again we'll have seen on the press places of work often being sources of outbreaks. So how you get on top of those quickly and support people with getting their staff to self-isolate and family members to self-isolate to get tested if they've got symptoms. So it's just a short paper asking for support for this proposal. We're planning to use our normal health protection board as the sort of engine of this work, using our Borough Resilience Forum, which includes many of our partners, so London Ambulance Service, for example, Met Police, Fire Brigade, NHS colleagues, and as our strategic group, and then our health and wellbeing to be our overseeing sort of gold level group. So that's what's summarised in the paper, and happy to take questions if necessary.
Thank you, Iona. Councillor Davis, I think you were first.
Mine is just a financial one, and insofar as I'm a little bit confused by how we sign off a plan. Obviously, the government's allocated nearly £1 million, but this plan doesn't tell us what it's going to be spent on. And I know there's a process that's been laid out here, which involves the workshop early in the week and health and well-being and all those sort of aspects of it. But it doesn't seem to me that there's any sign off from us as to whether the money's being spent appropriately or not before we actually commit to this. So just a bit of process, really. Is this going to return in July so we can at least see what it's being spent on?
Iona, do you want to pick that up?
Yes, partly because of the turnaround, this is largely the structure and the plan to have in place. In terms of the spend, it will depend partly on what additional services we need to support this. So if we had a local outbreak in Kingston, for example, and we had to have our own extra testing put in place, it would be commissioning that. If we had to employ extra contact tracers beyond what the national level can offer. It also covers things like our community engagement. So we know that whilst much of our population is receptive to digital messages, we know that's not everybody. So we will be doing some targeted work, particularly for our BAME groups and communities. So we're looking to provide small grants to some of our VCS organisations to do some of this engagement. So our local communities know the messages, know where to go to get testing, how to book testing, because if that falls down, it means that we could get outbreaks in particular parts of our community that are potentially more at risk. So it will be a range of things, Councillor Davis, but at the start of the plan, we need to see what plans and what spend is required rather than agreeing that up front before we'd started that. So I'm happy to provide more information as the plan evolves and the spending requirements become more obvious.
Chair, that sounds all great, but my fundamental question is, are we going to get this back in July? Because obviously you're signing this plan off next week. So in July, can we look at what the plan actually says?
I'm happy to revisit it in July.
The plan will be published on Tuesday. That's the requirement. It's the deadline of the 30th of June. I think there's a typo actually in the paper that says the 30th. It's the 30th of June that we have to publish it. But the spending requirements won't be available then. I'm happy to bring that back in July.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bass, you are next.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just looking at the main box, the purpose. So point 2 and 3, it's talking about the role of, I think you probably know where I'm going on this one. It's talking about the role of Kingston Health and Wellbeing Board, and in point 3 as well. Well, how can the Health and Wellbeing Board have a role if it's not formally meeting? Now, I did sit in on the on the workshop on earlier this week, but it seemed to me that discussions there were then providing a steer, not so much a decision, obviously, because we didn't have a vote, but a steer for what was going to happen, which just seems a bit irregular, because it wasn't an open meeting, there were no members of the public there, and it seems like the Health and Wellbeing Board is sort of being used to make decisions without actually meeting properly. So I'm a bit disappointed, really, that the administration, and this is something the Centre for Public Scrutiny is actually, you know, trying to recommend that people do have proper scrutiny. So I suppose my question is, you know, what is the statutory role of the Health and Wellbeing Board? Does it not have to meet as set out in our constitution? Can we just meet up informally in workshops? Does that work for decisions? I'm just a bit confused on, you know, what governance we're allowed to have really on that.
Thank you, Councillor Bass. Well, I would just repeat that we are meeting on the 21st of July, and but we note your concern about the Health and Wellbeing Board not meeting formally, and it is something that we're looking at. I don't know whether any officer would like to pick up on the step.
If I could just step in terms of governance, clearly in terms of expertise, many of the Health and Wellbeing Board members are providing that expertise and assurance in terms of ensuring there aren't gaps in the plan. So there's elements beyond just meeting formally. We will be using board members' expertise as part of the development and implementation of the plan.
Thank you very much. Councillor Shaper.
Thank you, Chair. I think actually, Councillor Bass, you probably highlighted some of an element of Health and Wellbeing Board, and I think can I just echo that an understanding also I think is an important point is about strategic partnership for that board as well, because I think actually my question's probably been answered from my owner earlier about for me it was about a programme of increased awareness for this role of the Health and Wellbeing Board to come together, where basically all elements of the system are there, which I think is actually a really important point in that board. But for me, it's also about this idea that as I say, about expertise and partnership, but also I think it's about being able to recommend and make suggestions about the best way of achieving an outcome. So if you want to have a positive outcome, if you want to increase awareness of making sure that, you know, you maintain a certain amount of, say, for instance, social distancing, or that, you know, as we come through this pandemic, what lessons we can learn, what the public can take away from that to keep safe communities. But I think as a board, I think I'd be interested to know what their strategic direction is when they come together. And so I think your point, Iona, about the clarifying the timeline for the spending, I think will be important, and I think that probably runs in parallel to the work you're doing. I mean, if you could clarify that. But my understanding is that as these discussions happen over the next few weeks, we'll be able to have a bit more clarity about the implementation of it all. That's really all. It was more of a comment stroke question, but that's what my understanding is about the Health and Wellbeing Board. But I'd be interested to know how you would tackle that, keeping awareness up in the public, from the public, you know, amongst the public, including vulnerable communities as well. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Iona, would you like to pick that up?
Yes, so clearly communications is going to be a strand of this, and getting out. We are going to be translating the materials into our various community languages, for example. I've mentioned about the engagement with particularly our ethnic minority groups, using our voluntary sector network, our faith groups because that will be really important that we get it percolated throughout the communities. And in fact, elected members have got a really key role in that, because they know your communities really well, and so knowing about the Keeping Kingston Safe message, and where people can get tested and how they can get tested, will be an important message to assist with that. Clearly, this is an emergency response. So if we had an outbreak in Kingston tomorrow, I would be utilising the funding to get on top of it in the best way possible, and wouldn't want to put any pause or brakes on doing that, because it would be vital to stamp out the embers as soon as possible. So if that was involving getting more staff in, buying more PPE, for example, commissioning more testing, that's what the funding is required for. It's to provide that emergency response if you have an outbreak.
Thank you. I think Councillor Bass wants to pick up.
Thank you. I pressed the right button last time. I actually shut myself out of the meeting by mistake. Sorry about that. Yeah, no, I take Councillor Schaefer's point, and I know that you have a deep interest in getting out lots of information from this, but I'd just like to point that, and giving lots of information to councillors and all the members of the board is not the same as scrutiny, and we really need to have a return to proper scrutiny and challenge as soon as possible, and other councils are doing that, so it's a shame that we're not. But just to move on to a question, so Iona, you mentioned about if there are outbreaks, and it seems likely that there will be outbreaks across the country, hopefully not in Kingston. And I just wanted assurance that as ward councillors and councillors, we would be made aware of this on a timely basis, because I know there were cases across the country where that hasn't necessarily happened, might have been in other countries, part of the union. And so if you could just explain what the process would be for letting councillors know.
So obviously patient confidentiality is vital, and because we're a small borough and small number of cases, we haven't been disclosing numbers of less than 5. Clearly, if there's a significant outbreak in a key setting, we would be letting councillors know. But at the moment, we're just getting very small numbers of positive cases through to Kingston, which is good to see. But I would put a process in place to let ward councillors know, but whilst also protecting from a patient confidentiality perspective.
Thank you. I just see that Gary Marston would like to speak about the Health and Wellbeing Board. Gary?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'm Gary Marston, Head of Democratic and Electoral Services. Just picking up on Councillor Bass's point about the role of the Health and Wellbeing Board as a result of the processes that are put in place on track and trace. It is something we're very mindful of, clearly, that we're in a situation where the board does now need to take an active role within the governance of these arrangements, and we are having conversations with Iona and her public health team now in order to establish whether there is a need for any formal meetings of the board in order to manage that governance. And obviously we'll let members know as soon as we have any dates or details of meetings that may be necessary to arrange.
Thank you very much, Gary, for that clarification. And I think the Chief Executive would like to speak.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. As Councillor Bass is aware, we've had a review of the Health and Wellbeing Board and a set of recommendations, and one of the reasons why is that I thought that we needed to ensure that we were achieving added value and that there was an impact from the work of the Health and Wellbeing Board. But I just want to set into context the statutory framework, because Health and Wellbeing Boards, they are a formal committee of the local authority, charged with promoting greater integration and partnership between all of the local bodies, NHS, public health, and of course the council. The statutory duty that they have with CCGs is to produce a joint strategic needs assessment, JSNA, and a health and wellbeing strategy for the local population. So that's the statutory duty. The boards have very few formal powers. They're constituted as a partnership forum rather than an executive decision-making body, and so we need to hold on to that. spending money, it fits in with our sort of scheme of delegation, the CCG as well, and that's how we commission services. But let's get it right in terms of the context. Health and Wellbeing Boards, very limited powers, and have no executive decision-making powers as such. The key objective of them is to produce the JSNA and the health and wellbeing strategy for the area. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful as a contribution.
Actually, Lida, could I just have a follow-up on that?
Certainly, go ahead.
That was actually very interesting and very useful. Thank you. But I suppose, yeah, so obviously Health and Wellbeing Board is the strategy part and the Health Overview Panel is the scrutiny part. So how can we dispense away with HOP? Could someone from Democratic Services answer that one?
Chair, shall I comment?
Yeah, yes, please,
well?
Gary. Yes, please, if you can.
I think in conversations looking at how we can best deal with the need to ensure that there is proper oversight of the council's response, but also maximum flexibility in terms of the way in which we manage that. We felt that an informal meeting of the type that's been proposed for 2 or 3 weeks' time would allow both the Health Scrutiny Panel and members of the Health and Wellbeing Board to come together in a way that in statutory terms they wouldn't be able to do so if those meetings were taking place on a formal basis. Because of the crossover between the HOP responsibility for scrutiny of the work of the Health and Wellbeing Board, it is possible to actually arrange a formal joint committee of the two. But certainly they can come together as an informal briefing, and we can ensure by way of the commitment to live stream that to the public that we maintain full transparency over the arrangements in respect of that meeting.
Thank you, Gary. If there are no other contributions, I would like to move to the vote. I will take the vote by roll call. I will take the recommendations on block unless a colleague indicates to the contrary in the chat function. So assuming that nobody objects, Fiona, would you please ask members how they'd like to vote?
Thank you, Chair. I will now go to the roll call. Councillor Schaefer?
For, thank you.
Councillor Bass?
For.
Councillor Cobbett?
For.
Councillor Davey?
For.
Councillor Davis?
Abstain.
Councillor Gander?
For.
Councillor Holt?
For.
Councillor Kerr?
For.
Councillor Mole?
For.
Councillor Self?
For.
Councillor White?
For.
The motion is carried with 9 for and 1 abstention.
Thank you very much, Fiona. So that recommendation is agreed. Now suggest that we move on to item 8 on the agenda, which is the terms of reference for Kingston's Economic Recovery Task Force. I'm delighted that this report is published just as Unilever announced that its hope and its intention to locate its European HQ here in Kingston. As you know, the company announced recently that it had chosen London rather than the Netherlands to be its home base. It's a real vote of confidence in the Royal Borough of Kingston that an international company on this scale should have decided to locate here. We know that this will bring jobs to our community, money to the high street, but obviously the proposal is subject to consultation with Unilever staff and a planning application and a planning process. And we're very keen that residents should be consulted throughout that process. The aim of the task force, of course, more broadly, is to promote employment and economic activity in the borough at a time when we feel that we are facing the worst recession in any of our lifetimes. I'm very glad that the Leader of the Opposition has agreed to join the task force to help in this endeavour, and I really hope that we can work together on this. It's widely believed that the pandemic has accelerated the decline of bricks and mortar retail, and it's more important than ever that we attract other forms of employment to the borough. So this report sets out the terms of reference for the task force, but it's worth perhaps just looking at our starting point. We have already established really good working relationships with the business community during this crisis. We delivered the business grants rapidly. 92% of those grants have now been distributed. That's somewhat higher than was outlined in the report when the report was written. We set up a business support programme to provide online training and support. We communicated the ever-changing guidance from government to business in an e-newsletter, which attracted 3,500 subscribers. We know we're going to need good intelligence to inform the work of the task force, and as a starting point, we have the Kingston Business Survey, which we conducted in April. We also know that we're going to have to facilitate a new programme of adult education to provide skills and employment training for people who find that they lose their jobs. We've worked with our partners most recently to successfully reopen all our town centres, but in particular Kingston Town Centre, and it was very pleasing that both John Lewis and Bentall's reported very healthy sales in those opening days. So the emphasis of the task force will be on deliverable projects. We don't want this to be a talking shop. We want this to be something that achieves real economic progress. But I think at this point it would be helpful to pass over to Duncan, whose job focuses on regeneration.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Duncan Brown, the Assistant Director of Regeneration, and thank you for that. I think you have outlined the key remit of this task force and its objectives, and we do feel a public-private sector partnership is key to the recovery of the borough and Kingston. I mean, we know the context and the challenges we face, and some of the report you'll see sets that out, and that's ever evolving. The statistics on the furloughing of staff and the number of job seekers allowance claimants is increasing by the day. So we have some big challenges ahead of us. I'm not sort of blind to think that this panel and this task force will resolve all of those, but I think what it does is pull the organisations together to think, how can we resolve some of these, which will be very local issues around unemployment, a new cohort of unemployment in our population, some people who've never thought that may take place in their lives. So we're having to have a broad approach. There are government funds and packages out there that we want to prime ourselves to bid for with our partners to bring in that investment. But as the leader says, the real boost yesterday with the announcement from Unilever, we want to work closely with them, and certainly the rest of the private sector and the major employers in the borough. We're not forgetting the SME sector, which makes up a huge part of the Kingston economy. We will want a specific work stream to feed into there. So we are trying to develop the governance beneath the task force, which will have core streams of work feeding into it, employment and skills, the voice of SMEs and other projects and programmes which can be supported with the council's resources and also our partners. So really, in terms of reference, 8 to 10 members. It's going to broadly meet sort of 6 to 8 weeks. We'll try and have a kick-off meeting next month, and that's kind of it in a nutshell at the moment. And we will evolve it and adapt it according to the need of the task force and the borough as a whole. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Duncan. I will now move the recommendations at the front of the report on page E1. Councillor Self.
Yeah, I'll second those. Thank you. Since I've just seconded them, I've indicated to speak later on, but I'd like to come in now if I may, Chair.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's just a point of clarity. You understandably and quite rightly raised the issue of, or the announcement on Tuesday, I think it was, of Unilever's intention to bring their European headquarters to Kingston, and I am predisposed to absolutely support that and think it would be obviously I can understand the economic benefit of that. But as the chair of DCC, I would like to make it clear that I am not taking any sort of view on a planning application that may be coming forward from Unilever on that site. And I don't think I need to absent myself from this conversation, because the item is about the broader aspect of economic development in Kingston. But I just wanted to clarify that point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the clarification. I want to just I want to remind everybody that we have Councillor Falchnikov-Sumner here, who's been granted permission to speak under Procedural Rule 27 tonight. Councillor Falchnikov-Sumner, please can you now address the committee with your comments?
Yes, certainly, once I've unmuted. Thank you, Chair. And first of all, I'd like to apologise for upsetting you during the first item. However, I do think my comments related to the council spend do relate to our financial position and our outturn. So whilst I apologise for upsetting you, I make no apologies for my actual comments. And I hope you take that in the spirit it is meant. I would like to, I've got a number of questions. That this is something that I feel is really important, and I'm really pleased to see that we're actually taking seriously how we are going to move on and develop our economy in Kingston. I have a number of questions related to this. The first one is, I would like to know what we're doing. Obviously, we will have all seen the details of the business and planning bill that has been read before Parliament, and I would like the Council's reassurance that we will do everything in our power to back some of them, hopefully not all of them, the measures that were in there. For example, the measures that were aimed at allowing cafes and bars to utilise space outdoors without a lengthy process to do so, the ability to do to actually without undue process to allow them to have off trade as well as on trade where they previously didn't have it, which will obviously hopefully allow them to expand their business without having too much shall we say pressure within the bars themselves, and also the measures regarding allowing them to extend the licensing hours of off trade to match their licensing hours on trade. Again, things which are designed to allow them to keep a business flowing without putting too much pressure on a number of people in the building. So I'd really love to hear everyone backing that, and the council doing everything they can to support these businesses, because small businesses really are the backbone of our economy. I'd like to know what the what's the plan for actually rationalisation of the city centre land use. As it will not escape anyone's notice, we have taken a massive hit on retail, and that is probably not going to recover. I have previously mentioned at council meetings whether the council would look or explore at having header leases so that we could actually take over some of these tenancies and allow our small businesses who previously wouldn't have been able to take on high street locations because the agents managing those businesses would not consider small businesses. So it'd be great if we could re-look at that and re-examine whether we could use header leases to give our local small businesses access to high street locations they previously would not have been considered for. I would also like to and ask what the plans are going to be. There's a lot of talk about construction, and I know there is a lot of excitement about the Eden campus and other things which are coming into the city centre. But we do have to be realistic in the fact that there are going to be major bills coming in front of Parliament over the next few months, which will affect the economic viability of taller buildings. And I think it's important that we don't put all our eggs in one basket. And I feel that we have to look at all other methods rather than just banking on a few large buildings bringing in additional office space. We also really need to consider our actual office space itself. Many companies are deciding to ditch large office buildings and actually look at reducing the number of hot desks that they need. And again, I think that will have a knock-on effect on Kingston's economy. So we need to be looking and exploring at different revenue streams and making sure, and I really hope the committee will be looking at those things in the future. I do have a question regarding business grants. I've had a few members of the Federation of Small Businesses raise some concerns about the high rate of achievement for actually turning around our business grants. And personally, I'm pleased that we've done it. I'm pleased that we've got the money out there. But they do have some concerns. Again, it's about oversight and due diligence. And I believe there are concerns in the auditing field at the moment that a lot of grants, in not just in Kingston, but in other areas, have not been properly assessed. And does anybody know what is the potential financial risk at the moment for business grants being paid to companies which are non bona fide, for example. So I'd be really pleased. I think it'd be a great idea to get an idea of that, because in order to turn around so quickly, I assume we may have trimmed some of the procedures. I would also like to ask, I asked a question about who's going to be a member of the finance of this board itself, this panel. I've yet to receive an invitation, so I assume I'm not on it. I would like to know, particularly with reference to the Lib Dem Cash for Access business, Kingston Business Forum. Is that going to be included on the list of consultees on this? Because that would be a major concern for me if it is. So I'd be very interested in getting some comments on all of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sumner. It's hard to know where to start because there are quite a few of those. First of all, just to put the record straight, you didn't upset me at all, so I didn't want you to think that that I had been offended. I wasn't. This is probably not the right order to take them on, but the business grants, you talk about the concern about whether there was due diligence and oversight. I do remember conversations that I had with Councillor Holt and with Sarah Ireland, where we were worrying a little bit that we weren't the first to get these grants out the door. We did do them rapidly, but other councils were paying their grants at great speed. And Sarah Ireland was extremely cautious about doing that because she didn't want to pay out the money without having done due diligence. So I will refer to her in a minute, but I know that that was something that she was really concerned about early on. And I don't know whether Councillor Holt wants to pick up on that as well. In terms of you talked about the need to sort of rationalise the land use in the town centre. I absolutely agree with you about that, and the ARUP work which we have already commissioned is partly commissioned to look at this and to look in with fresh eyes at our town centre and at some of the strategic points in the town centre to see how we can use those more effectively. And you will also be aware of the reimagining Kingston Town Centre work that has already been commissioned. So much of that is very much either some of it done or some of it very sort of centre stage in the task force work. Let me just see what else was there. You talked about office space and your concerns that we might have an exaggerated view of how much office space would be needed in the future. And I think we're all very aware that home working has been a bit of a revelation for many people. People have worked much more effectively than they might have expected to have been able to do remotely. But actually, what we have found, and I was at a meeting this morning where I was at a meeting of Kingston First this morning where a property agent talked about the fact that there is quite an interest in moving office space to outer London from the centre of the city. And while people have got used to not commuting, many people are thinking they would prefer to work in an office rather than at home, but they don't want to work in the centre of town. So we think that there might actually be an opportunity for more office working in Kingston and in the borough in general. And I certainly hope that that's the case. There were a number of other points. I don't know whether any other councillors want to come in at this point. I think Councillor Moll would like to come in. So please go ahead, Rebecca.
You covered a lot of the points, and hopefully I can just comment on a few others. So with town centre and public spaces, particularly with the small business, you're absolutely right, Councillor Falchikoff-Sumner, about small and micro businesses being the backbone of our economy, and that particularly in Kingston, in this borough, we have so many of them. We need to make sure we're supporting them. In terms of how that links to kind of, I guess, more the hospitality sector, you were talking about public spaces reopening, supporting them. We've been, the officers have been spending a lot of time working this out, communicating, and I'm sure that they can comment on that more. But one of the big issues with that is that the government didn't actually produce or announce their guidance until this, I think it was Tuesday. So it's actually it's been hard because we've been working with best practice, but obviously we've never had a recovery, a reopening from a pandemic before. So it has a lot of work on public spaces that you will have seen and which are coming up. In terms of licensing, I'm sure there's a council or officer better place to talk to me on it, but obviously everything has to be done within what's best for businesses and the public, so we have to make sure that it's based on evidence of what will be safe. And I just want to, although Councillor Kerr did talk about business grants, I think she's absolutely right. I think Kingston the officers did really well at balancing, ensuring that we were paying out to the right companies, the companies that were the ones who it was meant to go to, but also did it really quickly. That first round, the small business grants, started getting the first grants out just before the Easter weekend, which was really impressive. And then we've also got the discretionary business grants that we're about to do a second round of, that we're also really excited about. So there's lots of good work going on, and we just want to continue working with our businesses, which is what this task force is about, to ensure that Kingston is a place where businesses can thrive.
Thank you very much. I don't know whether there are any officers who wanted to pick up. I thought perhaps, I don't know, Sarah, did you want to pick up on the business grants as well?
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. I think you're absolutely right. There was a balance between speed, because I'm sure if we had been really slow, members would be sitting here now telling us businesses that went under, with making sure it went to the right people. We did the best we could in the circumstances. I'm very proud of the team of what they did and the support we have from members. But I have to remind members that this was a national scheme, and the central government clearly compelled the local authority to do it as quickly as possible. So I think we must remember that it wasn't Kingston doing this on their own. They were compelled to do it. There were league tables. Myself and the chief exec were rang up and spoken to about how quickly we were doing it. So I think we must remember the context, and I can understand why central government were doing it, because they wanted to support business. So I think we got the balance right, but we have a full internal audit programme that continues to look at this. And if you may remember, in part of the terms of this business grant, central government enabled it to be clawed back if it was found to have been paid incorrectly, and we will continue to look at that in that process.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Unless there's anybody else who wanted to speak, I'd like to move on to Councillor Davis.
Thank you. I must admit, I'm slightly cynical about the idea that these big events, like even given how big this one is, leads to radical change in the way people eventually end up behaving around work and all those other things. And I think, I'm not suggesting for a minute that this is the case, but you just look at the beaches in Bournemouth today and you realise that people are idiots, and they end up reverting to type rather than actually radically transforming things. And I just think that we need to be careful about, and this is why in a way this task force is very helpful, but be very careful to suddenly turn around and say that retail is finished and we need to radically transform. I think there's a long way to go on that. I'd also like to join you in welcoming the announcement that Unilever will be, effectively consolidating here its UK headquarters. Of course, I would like to add to that, that's despite Brexit, but we won't go there this evening probably. When it comes to this task force, I am happy to support it being set up. I think there's a number of things that we need to be careful of. One is, I don't think we should try reinventing the wheel on this. The council has over the years gone through various iterations of task force around supporting business and trying to help do things differently in Kingston. There's a number of reports and hundreds of thousands of pounds spent on consultants over the last 5 to 10 years on this sort of work. So I think it's important we don't immediately think we're starting again, because we're not. We are starting from a position where we do know quite a lot about the borough, and I think that's important. I think it's also very careful, as I said in my email to the leader, I think we need to be very careful that we don't just think we're setting up a board with 8 people on it and it's all going to be the usual suspects turning up, because I think we do need to think about have a new approach rather than just hearing the same voices that we always revert to in these things. And I think one of the things that struck me, and there was a report done, I think it was now must be 4 or 5 years ago, which clearly demonstrated that unusually for Kingston, as opposed to many other boroughs in London, we are actually a net exporter of work. So many more people leave our borough to go and work elsewhere than actually come in to work here. And the type of work that is the work that's being done in Kingston is of significantly lower value or pay than the work of the people who actually live here. And And I think that to me is really where I think the local authority could be helpful and supportive, because if it could retain some of those that actually have to flee because they can't actually afford to live here, then I think there's something in that. And of course, as you know, that's going to require some really tough decisions and discussions around housing and growth and all those sorts of issues, which are very tricky for us all to get into. The other thing I would say to you is that it's very much my view, and I don't think many people would disagree. It depends how far you go with this, but it's very much my view that the role of government is to get out of the way of business, not to get in its way. And certainly I hope that this is not going to be some massively over bureaucratic thing, that it's going to have a very light touch to it and is going to be there to support plans that emerge from business, as opposed to us trying to pretend we know anything about it. Because councils that pretend they know about that type of business, I think, are really going down the wrong thing. The councils know about their work, business knows about its. We can help support them, but I don't think we should try running it for them.
Thank you very much. I certainly wasn't proposing that I should start running any businesses for them. I agree with you, the point that you made in your response to me, and I'm sorry that I didn't get back to you, but that we obviously need the private sector very much represented on this task force too, and those invitations have gone out, but the membership has not yet been finalised. I agree with you too about the lower value of work that happens in the borough compared with the work that many of our residents do out of borough. I mean, one of the things that I've been concerned about is that jobs may go both in central London and in the borough. So we may have residents who have been used to quite a high standard of living finding themselves in a more difficult situation, as well as some of the people who would generally come into our borough to work in the shops, for instance, who might also need new forms of employment. I agree with you that we shouldn't condemn bricks and mortar retail overnight, but this has been a very, very slow train coming, and we have known for so many years that retail is changing. It's not to say that bricks and mortar retail doesn't have a place. I think it always will have a place, but I don't think we're going to need quite the same amount of floor space as we've had over the last 10 years or so. I don't know whether there are any points that I haven't covered that an officer would like to pick up. If not, then I'm slightly losing my place now. I think, is it Councillor Shaper next?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on point 8 really about and the Kingston, actually it's point 9, the Kingston Business Survey. I just wanted to make the point that my question first of all was whether there was any data that we captured about non-identifiable data from the survey about mental health issues. I wanted to raise it really because as mental health champion for the borough, I think it would be really good to try and capture some additional information on the impacts of mental health for those businesses involved in the survey, particularly as I'm noting the 82% of respondents thought they would survive, less than 6 months. I mean, that obviously is going to have a huge impact on pretty much everybody. But I'm focusing on, just as an example, on small businesses, family-run businesses. This must have a huge impact across families, and particularly if you're employing family members and so on. So I think I just wanted to draw attention really to the employers' pledge and the Kingston Time to Change hub in Kingston, and I really just wanted to make that point about the mental health champions working really sort of led by our local champions, but also about the involvement coordinated by Health Watch and Minding Kingston and Kingston First and over 20 organisations and from the voluntary sector and local businesses. And I just wanted to make that point that perhaps there were if we can capture some more data on mental health, I think we'd be able to basically to possibly find out what further help is required, what help and support is required. Because I think in a survey, if you can ask those questions, you can get an awful lot of data back and a lot of information. It's people's lives, and I think that would be really helpful. So I just wanted to plant that seed that perhaps when we talk about task forces, we can also give as much emphasis on mental health as well, because then there's going to be a huge impact in that area. So question really originally was just back to the original bit of the question, which was, do we have any further data? And if not, can we try and look to get some further data on mental health from this type of survey? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think you make a really good point about the importance of trying to sort of assess the mental health of our residents at a particularly stressful time. And I really agree with you that a lot of businesses have been at the sharp end of that stress, small and large. And we know, as Councillor Mull said, that we have an enormous number of very, very small businesses, of micro businesses. And many of them, I think, have found this a difficult time. I don't think that the business survey was asking those questions specifically. I think it is something that, as we set up our community task force, it would be a very appropriate question for us to be addressing. But I do also accept what you're saying, that you can't sort of silo this out. It affects everybody in every different aspect of life. I think Councillor Cobbett wants to speak, and it may be, I'm not sure whether he's picking this up as well, but anyway, thank you for that.
Chair, Councillor Bass first.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Bass first. My mistake.
That's right. No offence taken. Yeah, no, I just two questions. One is I'm also a director of the Chamber of Commerce and have been involved in them many years, so I know the good work that they do. Just really hope that that they will be involved in the task force. And then my other plea is, obviously this is a cross-party task force, which I welcome. But on point 3, it mentions that the terms of reference may be altered in consultation with the leader. Can we also add and the leader of the opposition? That's as long as Kevin wants to.
Sorry.
Can't hear you, Caroline.
Sorry, no, I was just trying to get back to the right page. So the first thing, the Kingston Chamber of Commerce has indeed been invited and has accepted, so we'll be involved. And I'm just trying to check the wording that you're asking us to look at.
I mean, I think it's quite standard wording that we always used to add. It's just in terms of reference to in consultation with the leader and leader of opposition.
I think I might pass on that. I may ask for a bit of officer guidance on it. I feel that this is we're very keen to have Councillor Davis on board, but I think that it is a task force that this administration is setting up, and I think that that it should be the leader of this administration that oversees its terms of reference. I don't know if there's any officer who would like to give me some guidance.
Surely it's the committee that oversees the terms of reference. We're talking about changing what we've agreed.
We're saying that authority will be delegated to the Executive Director of Place to agree the detailed administrative terms of reference. This is the detailed administrative terms of reference, and I think that that is reasonable, that we should do under a delegated power to the Director of Place in consultation with me. I don't think we would be asking the other members of the task force to also check it out. Councillor Cobbett, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Chair. It's just a comment really, although you may want to then comment on my comment, just sort of following up what you said in your introduction, which is to kind of make a plea for some joined up thinking and for some consideration of the role that our own adult education service can play in this piece. I think we quite often think of adult education in terms of it being a sort of nice to have community activity or about the wellbeing aspects, and it certainly does contribute in those aspects, but it also contributes in a very significant way in terms of skills. And we're likely to see a situation in which people are displaced from one part of the labour market and are looking to retrain in quick time to re-engage, and adult education also plays a role in, you know, with groups of people where actually they may already have ideas for their own enterprises and micro businesses, but need to improve their IT skills, or they may be learning English as a second language, and that's very important. And we're doing our best in the service to try and be a bit more strategic in terms of working jointly with further education providers, including Kingston College, other adult ed providers, and the university, and in terms of increasing what we're able to do digitally. But it would just be a plea really to make sure that adult ed is included in that piece. And as the service faces some of the challenges around going digital and finding venues in the community and moving location, that we do consider investing in it, because I really believe that it will be investment that reaps a return back for us and back for the wider community and the economy later on if we do. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cobbett, and I do agree with you that adult education plays a major part in this effort to kind of reskill our local community. I think the Chief Executive wants to come in next.
Yeah, thanks, leaders. Going back on the point around the recommendation 3, I think it's in order for the committee to consider a recommendation such as this, for the authority to be delegated to the Exec Director of Place with the leader in consultation with the leader of the council. The alternative would be to wait until the next R&R to sign off terms of reference, and because of the pace that's necessary, we want to get cracking with this. We want to make sure that we're up and running with this task force. So I think it's completely in order for this committee to consider and vote upon the delegation to the Exec Director in consultation with the leader.
Chair, can I just come on with that? I mean,
please do.
Yeah, I'm not rushing to be consulted. I can promise you, but I'm now very confused as to what it is that paragraph 3 is suggesting it's going to do, because paragraph 2 says that this committee is setting the terms of reference. Paragraph 3 talks about detailed administrative terms of reference. What are they?
Naz, would you like to pick up on this?
Thank you and good evening. Naz Sain, Exec Director of Place. Yes, so obviously we have set out for you in the report tonight broadly the kind of key principles for the task force moving forward. And I think, as Duncan explained, as we move forward and as we start to engage with those strategic partners, it may well be actually that the remit slightly changes just as the the wider economic picture is evolving. So I think this is just about how are we going to run it, how are we going to support it. It's kind of those kind of administrative tasks that one would expect, absolutely taking your point about Councillor Davis about not being over bureaucratic, but it was just about making sure that we kind of put the right support around this. So I hope that clarifies. So the task force terms of reference are within this report substantively. It's just whether they're required to be any tweaks, which we would do as one would do as an officer with the lead member. But we do not foresee there to be any significant departure from what we've brought towards you before you this evening. Thank you, Chair.
So I guess my next point, Chair, is that obviously were there to be significant change, they'd need to be reported back to this committee. After all, we're setting the terms of reference, aren't we?
Sorry, they would, but as officers have stressed, we are trying to do things at speed here, so we don't really want to, delay every decision on a 4-week cycle. I think
no, it's not delaying a decision. The decision's being delegated, but the decision needs to be reported back to this committee because it controls the terms of reference.
That's fine. Yeah, we can accept that. No problem. Absolutely. If there are no other speakers, then I would like to move to the vote. Once again, we'll take the vote by roll call. I'll take the recommendations en bloc unless a colleague indicates to the contrary in the chat function. And I don't see any. So in that case, Fiona, could I ask you to ask each member to indicate how they'd like to vote?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Shaper.
For.
Councillor Bass.
For.
Councillor Cobbett.
For.
Councillor Davey.
For.
Councillor Davis.
For.
Councillor Gander.
For.
Councillor Holt.
For.
Councillor Kerr.
For.
Councillor Moll.
For.
Councillor Self.
For.
And Councillor White.
For.
Chair, that is carried unanimously.
Thank you very much, Fiona. So that has now been agreed, and I'd like to move on to item 9 on the agenda, the South West London Waste Plan, and Councillor Moll is going to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. So we've got 3 recommendations on page F1 for the South West London Waste Plan, which I'm sure is what we all were very excited to do on one of the hottest days of the year, but actually contains some really good stuff. So this item is to inform members of the preparation for this document. It's being prepared jointly with the London boroughs of Croydon, Merton and Sutton. The current waste plan was adopted by the 4 boroughs in 2012. It has planning, policies and designated areas for waste management development. The plan also safeguards existing waste sites and identifies areas which may be suitable for waste use. Now, this waste plan period is coming to an end next year, and so it's necessary for us to prepare a new one. It's due to expire in February. Any delay in the timetable, even as slight as a week or a fortnight, jeopardises the boroughs reaching the fallback position of being at least post-examination in public when the current plan period expires. The new waste plan will cover the period to 2036. Importantly, has identified sufficient capacity within the plan area to exceed the waste apportionment target set out in the London plan. The only proposed change to designated waste sites in Kingston is the removal of Chesterton Industrial Area and the designation of an existing waste site in Hook Rise South. No new waste sites are being proposed. The recommendation is for approval at full council for a Regulation 19 consultation for at least 6 weeks, and then for the subsequent submission of the plan to the Secretary of State. Members should note that no critical change can be made to the plan at this stage. The consequence of delaying approval until the following full council meeting in October is that it can risk the 4 boroughs having a waste planning void, with the potential for a waste developer free-for-all in the absence of any planning policies. The adopted South West London plan is due to expire, and so we need to approve this. What's particularly great with this is that it's promoting an environmental and sustainable strategic approach to managing the South London's waste arising, things which are key desires for us. So I would ask you for you to approve the recommendations on page F1.
Thank you very much, Councillor Moll. I think Councillor Davis and Councillor Bass would both like to ask questions, but before I do that, I should ask officers if they have anything they'd like to add.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Tim Naylor. I'm the Assistant Director for Strategic Planning and Infrastructure. I don't have anything specific to add other than to say that obviously this brings us refreshes and brings our policy up to date in terms of waste management, and it does aim to reduce the amount of reliance on landfill and up the reliance on recycling and you know recirculating and reuse. So it does look, as I say, to sort of reduce that landfill capacity. But nothing other than that. And if you have any technical questions that I'm not able to answer, then I've got Tom Bright with us as well, who could answer more technical aspects. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I will now move the recommendations at the front of the report and ask myself to second it.
I'll be seconding that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have Councillor Falchikov-Sumner who wishes to speak under Procedure Rule 27 tonight, as we know. Would you like to address the committee on this item?
Sorry, Madam Chair, it wasn't this item, it was the next item on street lighting services.
I'm sorry. I think I knew that, but somehow I've got that wrong. So forgive me. I think Councillor Davis wants to ask a question, and then Councillor Bass.
Yes, thank you. I love discussing rubbish at this time of night. Can I just, it's just 2 very sort of brief points. One is there's an obviously, as Councillor Moll has outlined, a great deal of attention that's got to be paid to the timeline and the likelihood of objections. So I just want a reassurance really, because I'm not suggesting we need a plan B, but knowing the past history of Sutton Council when it comes to waste, and the difficulties they're getting from, for a considerable time from the public over that area, particularly over the combined heat and power unit. I just want to be reassured that we're confident that Sutton's going to come out of this and actually agree to it in the end, and we're not going to get a delay which causes us problems further down the line. That's the first issue. The second issue is paragraph 13, it lays out the financial implications. Well, it's sort of told us how much it's costing to write the plan, but it hasn't given us any other financial information as to, is this plan going to cost us more in the long run? Is it going to reduce? I mean, I hear reduction in landfill, that's great, but where is the detail of that? Because for us to put through a plan of such importance in terms of the council, it just seems a bit odd that we're a bit so light on the financial aspects of it.
Thank you very much. Tim, would you like to
Sure.
questions?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. So this essentially, the Regulation 18 process has been gone through. That's where you kind of explore a range of options and focus in on the agreed option. Reg 19 is where you take the agreed option forward for further consultation. Sutton have obviously committed to that with the other 3 boroughs. And once that goes through that consultation, it will then set the process in motion for an examination in public, referral to the Secretary of State. So to the best of my knowledge, Sutton are integrated into the process, and that now it is moving forward on that basis. So I don't think that there is any opportunity for, and I'm not involved with the sort of detail of those discussions with Sutton, having joined Kingston relatively recently. But as far as I'm aware, the back story on this is that the 4 boroughs have been working together to arrive at that point, and I haven't identified that there is any resistance or reluctance on Sutton's part to move forward. In terms of the financial implications, I mean, this is planning policy, so essentially it sets the planning context into which waste management will sit. It doesn't control the budget, it doesn't hold the budget. The assumption is that it works within existing budget allocation which is there, obviously managed through those services that take that forward. So the cost effectively to the council at this stage is the development of the plan and actually putting a new plan into place. Tom, I don't know whether you've got anything to add on that, but that's my current understanding from where I stand.
Good evening, Tom Bright, Principal Planning Policy Officer. Yes, the 4 boroughs secured funding from government for £136,000 to prepare the South London Waste Plan, and it's expected that that is sufficient to cover the cost of preparing the plan, including the examination.
Thank you.
So just for clarity, this is going to be no additional cost to the general fund of this plan.
Yeah, as I understand it, Councillor, yes, no additional cost.
Thank you, Tim. Councillor Bass.
Yes, so now it's 11 o'clock. I can't believe that we're still in this meeting at 11 o'clock. We've had no members of the public, we've had no delegations, no petitions or any possible thing that can happen at a meeting. This is just far too many items for one agenda. I mean, I know we're talking, as a bit of a pun, we're talking rubbish at 11 o'clock, but we know as ward councillors, waste collection is one of the things that our residents get really fussed about. A lot of residents don't access a lot of the high dependency services that obviously eat into quite a lot of our budget, but everybody is affected by how we deal with their waste. So we still got another item to go. So I can't believe, I know you're saying that it takes more officers to have more meetings, but I can't believe it's a good use of officers' time to have to sit around and wait for their time at 11 o'clock at night. I really can't believe this is the best way of doing it. Anyway, so coming back to this item, so we're, you know, and this is important, we're agreeing sort of the draft South London Waste Plan for the next 15 years, which is important and ties us in for a long time. So my question is, why are we having to consider such a long time? I mean, you know, that's quite a few administrations in that. So why are we having to tie ourselves in for 15 years, not 5 or 10? It just seems an excessively long time. There probably is a technical reason for it, but I would just like to know the answer to that, please.
I'm very happy to pass that on to an officer, because I don't know why it's a 15-year time span. But what I would say about, I mean, I know it's 11 o'clock at night, but we've had much later strategic committees when we had 5 committees in operation, and I have certainly sat through neighbourhood committees that have gone on for longer than this. So I know it's testing in a virtual meeting, but it's not unprecedented by any means.
Can I just come back to that? That is generally because we have members of the public getting involved. We haven't had any of that. This is just far too many items on one agenda to be properly scrutinised, really.
Well, I think we might have to just agree that it's a moot point. I don't know whether any officer would like to be able to come back to Councillor Bass's other point about the 15-year time span.
Yes, I will, Chair, Tim Naylor. As far as I understand it, the time frame is set, will have been agreed by the 4 boroughs in terms of the fact that it's a fairly lengthy document. It requires quite a lot of research and evidence. There is a cost. The general view with planning policy is that it will be reviewed. It can be reviewed as an interim, and indeed the government encourages planning policy to be reviewed, I think at 5-year intervals now. But because of the extensive nature of the document, the fact that it covers a wide area, that is generally the accepted lifespan for policy in this context and capacity.
Thank you very much. If there are no other questions, I think that we should perhaps move to the vote. Once again, we'll take the vote by roll call. I take the recommendations en bloc unless anybody indicates to the contrary in the chat function. Don't see any names coming up in the chat function. So Fiona, can I ask you to ask members how they'd like to vote?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Shaper.
For.
Councillor Bass.
For.
Councillor Cobbett.
For.
Councillor Davey.
For.
Councillor Davis.
For.
Councillor Gander.
For.
Councillor Holt.
For.
Councillor Kerr.
For.
Councillor Mole.
For.
Councillor Self. Councillor White.
For.
Chair, that is carried unanimously.
We'll introduce the item.
Right, sorry, it's late. I think I'm unmuted now. So this item is about the re-procurement of the street lighting contract. It's procurement that will be shared with Sutton, so Kingston and Sutton together, for a total contract of 10 years and the value of £2 million per annum. And the advantages of doing this are for economies of scale and to get the best deal. It's outlined in the paper. It's quite clear, I think. So I would just like to see, where is the page? Recommend, we propose, sorry, I've lost my page now. Yes, I recommend that we approve the procurement strategy and proceed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Does anybody want to ask any questions on this? Ah, yes. I remember now, Councillor Faltercross-Sumner, this was the one that you did want to speak on. And just to go through the correct form of words, I just remind everybody that you're speaking under Procedural Rule 27 tonight. Would you like to address the committee?
Thank you. Can I just first start by thanking Roger, who met me on a very, very hot afternoon and had a very geeky conversation with me about LED street lighting, high output reflectors and control systems. So I'd like to thank him for his time. This is one of the things that I used to do. So I used to do LED street lighting, and I used to actually tender for it. So of course I'm naturally very interested in this. I'm a big believer in LED street lighting. And one of the things that I wanted to ask, I wanted to make sure that, first of all, as a 10 years is a bit more unusual. It's normally like 5 or 7. So that was, you know, my first question is really, I'm slightly reserved about the 5 to 7, it not being 5 years. Because the technology changes so rapidly. Because one of the main benefits of LED street lighting, and I know it's very, very late, and to paraphrase Councillor Cobbett at the committee where you changed the, allowing residents to talk at committee meetings, you know, it's gone 11 o'clock at night and the meeting's still going on. So it's almost like we need strategic committees back again. So what I'd like to say on this is that 10 years is a long time. There is going to be huge changes in technology. The majority of saving from LED lighting comes from the ability to have control systems, which allows you to dim it in circuits. That's where the majority of savings are, and also the technology in high reflectors, which bounces the LED lighting back into it. So I am very concerned about having a long contract in a field where technology is changing constantly and, you know, annually. So that is my main concern on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Faltercross-Sumner. Yes, I queried the 10 years myself, and as you probably understand, having been in this field, it's more attractive for bidders to bid for that length of contract. So we are expecting to get a better price. I take on board what you're saying about the technology changing, but I would be very disappointed if we were hardwired in to a contract that meant that we just had the technology as it was in the year 2020. I'm pretty sure that wouldn't be the case, but I'd probably ask officers, if we don't know for sure now, that is certainly something we should check before we go to procurement. And yeah, I fully support the management system that will allow us to get the most savings, being able to dim the lights and control that. So yes, that is something that we're exploring as well. I'd offer it if Sarah would like to comment further.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Chair, if that's okay. I think we must be fair, we are purchasing the contractor to do the work, we're not purchasing the technology. So obviously we'll be flexible around that technology over the 10 years. We have done market testing, soft market involvement, and this is attractive to the market. And therefore, I think that Councillor Sumner's worries about technology will be covered in the contract. So I'm comfortable with that.
Thank you very much. If there are no other speakers or questioners on this item, I suggest that we move to a vote.
Councillor Davis.
I'm so sorry, Councillor Davis, go ahead.
So I didn't quite know what to do there. I was waving frantically. Thank you. It's just a bit of two points, really. I mean, again, it's history, really. We seem to have been replacing our street lamps with LEDs forever, and I'm just a bit concerned how long this is going to take. So, in my memory, I think it's 10 years we've been at it to date. So, how many LED street lamps are currently converted to LED? And at which point in this 10 years will we have completed the job of converting every street lamp to LED? That's the first issue. The second thing, which I'm a bit surprised at, is the replacement of posts, whatever you call them, lamp posts, is part of this contract. But there's absolutely no mention here of on-street charging for cars through lampposts, which I'd have thought would have been something we'd have wanted to explore, but it doesn't seem to be anywhere in this particular document at all to indicate that we're interested. So I'm just trying to understand why that is, because it does seem rather odd.
Thank you. Not sure if Councillor Gander wants to take that, or if an officer should take it.
I'll just confess that I thought I had to hand how far we were through, but I don't have it to hand. And it may be that we'll have to get back to you on that, Councillor Davis. The using of the street lamps for charging electric vehicles is something that we're already underway with. So we have Go Ultra Low Cities, GULCS funding from the GLA to do that work, and it may or may not be through this contract, and that's something I would need to check. Maybe Sarah knows, but if not, again, we'll have to get back to you on that.
I haven't got the detailed spec to hand, but I think we would definitely be wanting to explore that, Councillor Davis, and I'll confirm that back to you.
Sorry, thank you very much. It's a good point. If there are no other speakers, then can I suggest that we move this one to a vote as well? Unless anybody has any objections, I'll ask Fiona to ask members how they wish to vote.
Thank you, thank you, Chair. Councillor Schaefer.
4.
Councillor Bass.
4.
Councillor Cobbett.
4.
Councillor Davey.
4.
Councillor Davis.
4.
Councillor Gander.
4.
Councillor Holt.
4.
Councillor Kerr.
4.
Councillor Moll.
4.
Councillor Self.
4.
And Councillor White.
4.
Thank you, Chair. That is carried unanimously.
Thank you very much, Fiona. We've now reached item 11, Procedure Rule 30, urgent decisions. Item 10, sorry, I think this should be item 11. It's a matter for noting. It's a requirement of the Constitution that matters dealt with under this procedure are reported to the appropriate committee. I'm assuming that nobody wishes to speak on this, and if that is the case, Kevin would like to speak. Councillor Davis.
It's just one quick one. It could have passed me by, but I don't recall ever receiving notification of the Adult Social Care commissioning additional capacity for hospital discharges. So I'd be grateful if I could be sent that. I think I've had most of the others sent to me, apart from the planning applications, but I don't believe I ever saw that one.
I'm sure that officers can make sure that that happens. Lauren, did you want to speak?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Lauren McCann, General Counsel Monitoring Officer. Councillor Davis just said that was one of the very early decisions that we took, but I'll ensure that that's sent across to you tomorrow morning. We tried to limit the number of decisions that were taken outside of the formal committee process, and I think you'll agree that there's rather few, given that there was a 3-month period. We tried to reinstate our committee process as soon as possible in our rejigged format, and these are the decisions that were taken during that time. they were all, we increased the level of consultation with councillors in order to try and make sure there was as much involvement as possible. So we included the opposition, so the leader of the opposition, chairs of all committees and the leader of the council. And so if there are any questions, but it's just an item for noting.
Sorry, can I just come back, Chair, on that there, because I'm a bit confused by it, because I thought this was sort of recent decisions, but the website's got many more decisions on than this. I know some weren't relevant to strategic committees, they were neighbourhoods, but there's many more. I mean, the one about which we discussed earlier around PPE, but that doesn't appear on this list. So this obviously is for a period, is it, rather than right from the beginning?
It's for a period of time, but it's the decisions that were taken under the urgency provisions rather than officer decisions. So you will see both published on the website. Some were taken as officer decisions and they would have been in any event. These are the decisions that were taken under the urgency provisions.
I think Councillor Bass would like to speak.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something on the small sites programmes. It particularly affects sort of wards. So I know a bit about it, though it's some general points really. I don't quite understand why it has to be an urgent thing. I mean, lots of delayed because of COVID. Surely planning and sort of grants from the GLA, you could ask for delay as well. I mean, this whole small sites thing has just been quite bizarre, really. The amount of secrecy about all the different sites, you know, we didn't have any hard copies of stuff. We weren't told what the other small sites are. Now the consultation with residents being rushed through during, as we're only just easing out of lockdown. I mean, I sat in on a webinar and there are only about 4 residents on it. And then I understand that the planning application is going to be put in just before the summer holidays. So, you know, over August when people are away. And very concerning, there seems to be no protection for the existing residents of Cumberland House. I know that specific thing, but I mean, you know, it doesn't really seem the best way to get engagement and to treat residents of our council estates when the residents of the Cambridge Road estate got treated so much better. They had, you know, asked their opinion and everything, whereas our residents in Cumberland House are just having this hoisted on them.
Councillor Bass, I know that Councillor Davies and Naz would both like to speak to this item. I would just say, for myself, one of the small sites is in my ward, and I don't think there was anything unexpected about it, because last summer I was informed about it. There was Ian Winslet did a kind of presentation for all councillors, I thought, whose wards were affected. And I do absolutely accept that trying to consult and trying to inform residents at this time when we can't hold a public meeting is not easy. But this week we had 2 webinars about the development in Canterbury, and on the one that I attended there were 212 questions and it went on for more than 2 hours. So although I know it's not as good as being in a public meeting, I think it's as good as we can make it at this, you know, in the kind of strange circumstances we found ourselves. But I would like to pass on, please, first.
Sorry,
to
can I just add to that? Just to add, so one of the questions I asked when I went to the webinar was, what are you doing to protect the existing rights of residents? Because Cumberland House is an area of lots of CPZs. There's absolutely nowhere to park, and there was a lot of umming and ahhing from the consultants, and they just said that wasn't in their brief. You know, and this is the trouble if you rush things through, that these sort of things could get overlooked.
I'm going to pass you on to Councillor Davey, who'd like to speak, and to Naz, who'd like to speak, because the particular issue you draw attention to certainly didn't apply in my ward, where the question of CPZs was addressed and was understood. It was understood that the new development residents would not have parking permits, so they would not be allowed to park in the CPZ during all of the hours that the CPZ operated. Councillor Davey.
I think we need to see this in the context of planning across the board. The government has not suspended planning applications. They've encouraged that planning should go ahead, and it's seen as a way of promoting the local economy, of getting the building going. And so central government has asked us to continue with planning applications and building. You'll note the construction industry didn't shut down. It kept going. So this in line with central government policy. Small sites, all councillors were given opportunities to attend, to be part of the consultation last summer and throughout at other times, but sadly some councillors chose not to attend and chose not to attend the rearranged meetings or to make rearrangements to have meetings. They actually chose not to attend. Now, if councillors choose not to attend and choose not to attend rearranged meetings or to actually ask for meetings, it's very difficult for officers to do their job. And yeah, I recommend, if you want to know about the building in your ward, I recommend working with officers and attending consultation or arranging. If you can't make those appointments, they're very flexible, I find. They will make other appointments and you can get to see them. On the other things, the delay and funding. We're getting funding for the mayor of this. If we delay this, we hold up things. We could find ourselves losing funding. We can't afford to do this. I know it's a great challenge. It's the first time we're going to be building council homes in nearly 40 years. And I know that's a new thing. And I know it's a new thing for the opposition to be building council houses. But it's exciting. And we've got a real opportunity to be building council houses again. Let's seize it.
Thank you. Naz, would you like to contribute?
Thank you, Chair. Just building on Councillor Davies' point, and I think yourselves in terms of the engagement that we've done with members informally right at the beginning of the process, and we are working really, really hard. Just in terms of the comparisons that have been made to the Cambridge Road estate, I think it's really important to recognise that we absolutely want to engage with all residents on all developments that are being done on council land, but they are of a very different scale. The administration introduced a voluntary ballot, and there are over 2,000 homes being built on that estate. So I think the comparison isn't necessarily correct in terms of scale, but that doesn't take away the principle of engagement. We are working really hard, and as the leader has said, you know, there was a well-attended webinar yesterday or the day before, and we will continue to do everything that we can under the current government guidance around engagement and the planning process. These are sites that the council has not brought forward for a period of time, and I certainly remember in my first week of being in this authority, we were facing a request to the then Secretary of State for the council to dispose of these sites because the council had no plans. And we worked very quickly with members to submit to the GLA an application for funding, and we were able to secure £9.5 million to bring forward this first phase. The Mayor, as you will all be aware, has got a timeline for the use of that funding, and therefore it is imperative that we work as well as we can to try and meet those targets, because of course that then allows us to have a track record of delivery that can hopefully then open up the opportunity for us to secure further funding to deliver more affordable homes, which are much needed across our borough. So hopefully that gives you some more information. As always, really, really happy to continue to work with members right across the board within those wards that are going to be seeing some of these early new homes being brought forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. If there are no further comments, then I think that item is just for noting, so I don't think we need to vote on it. And there are no urgent items authorised by the Chair, so that concludes the business this evening. The time is 23:25. Thank you all very much and good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.